Okay, we're going to come to order. This is the Wednesday, December 2nd, 2009, regular meeting of the Planning Commission. Can I have roll call, please?
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Schmitz.
I need to do that.
Here.
Commissioner Yasayan.
Here.
And Chair King.
Here. Report regarding posting of agenda, please.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, November 25th, 2009 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Great. Would everyone please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 4 is to welcome 2 new commissioners, but only one is here this evening.
Right. Stephanie Landrigan will be starting at our next meeting. And then we also welcome today Eric Yasayan. And he is now our new planning commissioner.
Very good. Welcome, Eric. Would you care to share a few remarks on what you're doing here?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm honored to be part of this commission. And having been born and raised in this city all my life, the city has shaped me in many ways, and it continues to do so. And for that reason, I'm honored and humbled to be part of this commission. And since my appointment last week, I've had the opportunity to meet some of the planners and have a tour of the planning department thanks to Laura. And I've also had the time to watch many of the commission meetings and read the reports, and I'm convinced that the city has an impressive planning department, and the commission is well served by their hard work. And I look forward to working with them and along with my fellow commissioners in the weeks and months to come. And I also, throughout that time, I also plan to do a lot of listening and a lot of asking questions. And I also plan to keep an open door to any new ideas or suggestions that anyone may have, whether it's one of my experienced colleagues up here or anyone from the department or especially anyone from the community. So please keep that in mind. Anything that you think might be helpful to the commission or the department, I want to know. So please keep that in mind. And with that said, thank you for this opportunity to serve on the commission, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thanks.
Terrific. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
I look forward to your participation.
Thank you.
And moving, unfortunately, on a related subject, we'll move to agenda item 5.
Yeah, agenda item 5 is a resolution of commendation for Mr. Jordan Lee Torgerson. Mr. Torgerson was a member of our planning commission for 6 years. So it's quite a commitment to the city of Glendale, and we were proud to work with him and would like to present him with the resolution.
Yes, I have a resolution in my hands. Mrs. Torgerson, would you like to approach the podium?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My pleasure. I want to obviously read this as well. And it's a resolution of the Planning Commission awarded to Jordan Lee Torgerson. It's a whereas Mr. Torgerson has completed 6 years of service to the City of Glendale as a member of the Planning Commission from November 18, 2003 to November 18th of 2009. And whereas the Commission has a high regard to the ability of Mr. Torgerson to analyze the various issues which have come before the Planning Commission during his period of service, and whereas his unselfish contribution of personal time, energy, and knowledge in the field of planning and engineering contributed to upholding the general plan and recommendations of policies and ordinances to the City Council, and whereas Mr. Torgerson has demonstrated strong and continuing interest in solving the many varied problems before the Commission for the purpose of improving the welfare of the citizens and protection of their rights, now therefore it is resolved by the Planning Commission of the City of Glendale that the Commission extends to Mr. Torgerson sincere appreciation for the years of service so graciously given. There you are.
Thank you very much.
I will miss having you by my side.
I'm actually going to miss the Planning Commission, but most of all, I'm going to miss the staff and the commissioners. It's been a pleasure to serve the city for the last 6 years. Eric, you're going to have a good time.
Thank you.
Wish you the best of luck, and same to Ms. Landrigan. be a fun period of time of your life, and I hope you have as good a time doing it as I did.
Thanks. I look forward to it.
Thank you very much, one and all. I'll probably show up on the zoning advisory board or some excuse to hang out with us. Free diet Pepsis from time to time.
Well, again, Lee, thank you very much. You're leaving already?
I'm going to TiVo this. So I can go home and watch it with some refreshments.
Approval of minutes, item 6, or agenda item 6 from November 18th. Any comments or corrections to those minutes, please?
I move we accept the minutes.
I have one correction that needs to be made, and that's page 10. I know Mr. Torgerson is gone, but we need to change that Toreros to Torgerson.
In a couple locations, both in the motion and in the vote.
Plus my name.
Did you have something you wanted to comment on?
Well, I know I wasn't part of this meeting the last time when it happened, but I know there was a mention of the Pilates studios under on page 5, the 601 South Brand Boulevard, and I don't see a mention of it in this minutes. So just
You actually jumped on something I was going to ask, is these minutes, are these considered to be something of a brief summary, or are they part of the official record as it relates to the videotape?
They are a summary of the meeting, and we archive the video for a long time on the city's website, so that information as part of the public record is retained.
Because building on what that said, there was a lot of things, a lot of argument, a lot of position that these summary minutes really don't carry. So if these are considered the official record, it's something we're going to need to work on. If the videotape or the recording is the official record, then we're okay.
Well, let me answer the question this way, I guess. The minutes are the official record of the actions that were taken. Sorry. The minutes are the official record of the actions that were taken. If there are particular issues or arguments that a commissioner feels were central to the decision-making of the commission, then by all means that should be added, but it's not intended to summarize each and every issue or argument that was raised on a particular item, because that would be... in addition, the motion is also part of the record, so the motion usually carries a lot of the information that the commissioner relied on in making this determination. And again, I don't know how long the videos are archived, but it's for a significant amount of time. And in any time we end up in, for example, litigation on something, those videotapes are transcribed for the purposes of the court hearing. So there is a record kept.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Garcia. Does that help with your inquiry?
Yeah.
Because I had a very similar concern.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So that said, we have a motion to approve the minutes as
Second.
written with the correction.
Right.
So we have a motion and a second. Call roll, please.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Schitz,
Aye.
Commissioner Yesayan,
abstain.
and Chair Kane.
Aye, and a vote of 3-0 with one abstention. The minutes of November 18th, 2009 were approved with correction. Agenda item 7 is oral communications. I have no cards for that. So we'll move on to our consent items. Agenda item 8. It's the first item A is use variance case number PVAR 2008-019 and parking use permit case number PPUP 2009-001. This was continued from November 18th. The location is 601 South Brand Boulevard. The applicant is the AMAC Group. The property owner is Edward Tarvadian. And it was a use variance for a 3,830 square foot physical instruction school located in South Brand Boulevard specific plan area where the said use is not permitted. In addition, applicant was also requesting a parking use permit to provide the required 38 spaces on site as required parking for the physical instruction school. And we continued the item to approve an updated motion. Staff, would you give us the overview of the updated motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. On November 18th, the Planning Commission made a motion to continue this matter to December 2nd for staff to prepare the findings and the conditions. Excuse me. Three of the conditions that were added by the Planning Commission, if you would like, I could go over those, or if you are...
No, why don't you just briefly share what those were?
Sure. So the first one was an acceptance affidavit in a form acceptable to the city attorney must be provided by the owner of the property, agreeing that all the conditions listed below will be met within the next 120 days. That was the first one, and this was done in a specific order. So this should be the first condition. This should be done first before the rest. Second one was the owner of the property shall apply for a building permit to legalize the partition wall. And third one was, after an application for the building permit has been submitted for the partition wall, per condition 2, a parking lease shall be signed that will have a minimum lease term same as the existing lease term for the tenant space. So those were the three conditions brought forward by the Commission. And having said that, we have a motion to approve the variance case number PVAR 2008-019 and parking use permit case number PPUP 2009-001, based on the findings that were brought forward by the Commission on November 18 and the conditions.
All right. I do have two speaker cards on this. The first one is Joseph Shamolian. Oh, no, it's only if you wanted to speak, sir.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
he asked before the hearing started, and then he said he wanted to speak for the owner if there was anything relative
Yes, we'll print conditions.
to the case. So there may be, is why I suggested he filled that out.
Oh, I understand now. Okay. And then I also have a card from Hayward Minus Mashichi. Thank you. Now, you're welcome to speak, but it's not for any of the discussion from before. It's simply about the findings and the conditions, and if there's anything you want to say about those. Please come forward.
Hello, my name is Hayward Minas Masihi, and I'm here for 601 North Brand, 601 South Brand. I apologize. I just wanted to make a correction that Chairman Kane stated that it was a space for use variance for 330 square feet. It's actually 3,830 square feet.
I may have misspoke. Thank you for correcting me on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Apologies.
Obviously, you're fine with the findings and the conditions that are imposed?
Yes, I'm fine with all that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Any further comments from commissioners?
So since we're putting the conditions imposed on the owner and the owner is representing, we don't need to hear from them.
No, only if they wanted to speak? Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So I'm in search of a motion.
I moved that upon review and consideration of all materials and exhibits of the current record relative to use variance case number PVAR 2008-019 and parking use permit case number PPUP 2009-001, located at 601 South Brand Boulevard, and after having conducted a hearing on said matter, that the Planning Commission hereby approves said use variance case number PVAR 2008-019 and parking use permit case number PPUP 2009-001, based on the following findings and subject to the conditions stated below. And there's a B, C, D findings, and the finding of fact for parking use permit from 1 through 10, and the conditions 1 through 10, all inclusive.
I second.
A motion support. Call roll,
Chair,
please.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just wanted to put on the record, because we talked about it before the meeting, but not on the record, that Mr. Yasayan, if he's going to participate in the vote on this, that he did reviewed the tape and the report and is prepared to act on it if he so chooses. And he's nodding yes, so we'll just put that on the record.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garcia. All right, so on that basis, if you'd like to participate, you can. May we call roll, please?
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Sheets,
Aye.
Commissioner Yesayan,
Aye.
Commissioner Kane.
Aye, on a vote of 4-0, PVAR 2008-019 and parking use permit case PPUP 2009-001 has been approved with conditions. We'll move on to agenda item 8B, which is use variance case number PVAR 2009-033. This also was continued from November 18, 2009. The location is 517 through 517 and a half South Verdugo Road. It's Indra Restaurant. The property owner is Dan Kachachurian, and it was an application for a use variance to allow the sale, service, and on-site consumption of alcoholic beverages at an existing full-service restaurant located in a multifamily residential zone in the R3050 moderate-density residential zone, which is described as a portion of Julio Verdugo 97.20-acre allotment of Rancho San Rafael, District Court Case 1621. It was a recommendation. We continued the item for the purpose of receiving an updated motion for approval. Staff, Ms. Toledo, would you give us an overview of the motion?
Yes, as you indicated, Chairperson Kane, the board did make a note to continue the matter, made a motion to continue it rather for today's date in order for staff to prepare the findings. The findings were obviously consistent with the Planning Commission's direction in support of the variance request. So what we've done is that we've attached the conditions of approval, which are included in your packet, the standard conditions that typically they're standard that the City of Glendale uses, and the self-imposed conditions submitted by the applicant at the hearing on November 18th. Again, many of these suggested conditions by the applicant are similar to the standard conditions imposed by, are actually imposed by on other establishments in Glendale. And so in that case, staff has substituted Glendale standard conditions for ease of enforcement. In addition, there was a minor correction that was made, so you've received an email of the motion or revised motion. In addition, we included some hard copies. There was a minor change on the first findings, which states that the strict application of the provisions of any such ordinance would result in practical difficulties, whereas before it read it would not accordingly. And there are 22 conditions that are being noted in the motion.
Mr. Lee, I've noticed that you also attached the self-imposed conditions as part of this, and I know a lot of that information that was on the self-imposed conditions were part of this 22 conditions. But I think during the hearing, we made a comment about self-imposed conditions having the Los Angeles Municipal Code, and we wanted that corrected to reflect Glendale. So if this becomes a part of these conditions, how would that play out?
Well, my understanding is that we just included the self-imposed conditions for your reference only. You're actually not actually voting on the self-imposed conditions, strictly the ones that are noted in the actual motion, item 1 through 22.
Okay.
I don't believe that particular one was included because we substituted that for the one condition that says that the applicant, or in this case, the establishment shall be in accord with all local, state, and federal regulations as it relates to serving alcohol.
So then really this should not be part of this.
That is correct. You're only voting on 1 through 22 that's noted in the Planning Commission staff report and attachment.
Well, it came with the report.
Again, for reference.
It's misleading. That's right. Thank you for clarifying that. All right. I do have one speaker card on. Was there anything you wanted to add, Ms.
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
I do have one speaker card on this one.
Good evening, Commissioner Kane, Commissioners. I did download the staff report from the website and reviewed it. The only correction I had to the findings was the correction Ms. Toledo has already indicated. would not instead of would. We've also had a chance to review the 22 conditions recommended to be imposed with my client, the owner of Indra Restaurant. She has no opposition to them, finds nothing objectionable there, and agrees that this grant, if approved, has a 3-year expiration date, so we'll see you again in 3 years.
And hopefully it'll be a 5-year extension, and she's been a good neighbor in that time.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. Any comments, corrections, or other observations from the commission? Seeing none, who would like to make a motion?
I'd like to move that upon review and consideration of all materials and exhibits of current record relative to use variance case number PVAR 2009-033, 517 to 517 and a half South Verdugo Road, and after having conducted a hearing on said matter, that the Planning Commission hereby approves use variance case number PVAR 2009-033 with the attached 4 findings and the 22 conditions that are part of the motion.
Second.
Motion support, call roll, please.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Schultz,
Aye.
Commissioner Yesayan,
Aye.
and Chair Kane.
Aye, and a vote 4-0, use variance case PVAR 2009-033 has been granted with the aforementioned conditions. We'll move on to agenda item 9. This is a zoning appeal. The next item is an appeal from the decision of the zoning administrator or the zoning hearing officer. This matter is heard as a de novo hearing. Testimony given at the zoning administrator's hearing should be repeated because the commission does not review the tapes of those meetings. Decisions rendered today will be based on the evidence presented at this hearing and the evidence in the file, including appeal documents, staff reports, and letters received. Individuals speaking today should therefore present all the evidence which they may wish the commission to consider. A handout describing the appeals process is available at the front counter. Appeal items are considered as public hearings. The commission will consider testimony from the appellant, applicant, staff, and any member of the public wishing to speak. If you wish to speak, please fill out a card and present it to the recording secretary. That said, we're moving to variance case PVAR 2009-027. The location is 1326 Barrington Way. The applicant, appellant, or property owner is Brett Warner. It's a request to legalize a 330-square-foot addition at the rear of an existing single-family house without providing the required 2 covered and enclosed parking spaces. The zoning hearing officer denied the variance application on September 16, 2009. An appeal was filed to overturn the zoning hearing officer's decision. The recommendation is that we reverse the zoning hearing officer's decision and approve the variance request under PVAR 2009-027. Ms. Toledo, an overview, please.
Yes, just briefly, I would like to, again, you mentioned the requested action. The appellant is requesting the reversal of the zoning hearing officer's decision to deny the variance, which was to legalize 330 square feet at the rear of the existing single-family house without providing the required 2-car garage or covered and enclosed parking spaces. The site is currently developed with a single-family house and a substandard garage, which can actually accommodate 2 parked vehicles in tandem configuration, although that is not considered by code legal parking spaces. The driveway is approximately 65 feet from the garage door to the back of the sidewalk, and also there are 2 mature trees in the rear yard, including a 16-inch diameter California oak tree and a 30-inch diameter Brazilian pepper tree. I will not go over the project history, but if you've noted, there are several code enforcement dates that are, in this case, involved with the property. Basically, summary of the zoning hearing officer's decision. The zoning hearing officer determined that all 4 findings could not be made in favor of the application. The fact that the addition to the house that had been constructed without the necessary building permits did not constitute a justifiable hardship, but rather it was a self-imposed hardship. In addition, the zoning hearing officer noted that the applicant's case relied primarily on the presence of the oak tree on the subject lot. And in that case, the simple existence of the tree does not automatically create an exceptional circumstance, especially when related to parking issues. I will not go over the summary of the appellant's discussion because he obviously is going to go over that in his presentation. Regarding staff analysis of the appeal, basis of the appeal described basically is that the zoning hearing officer violated certain conditions, or in this case, certain specific sections of the code, and did not consider all relevant information and exceeded his authority by denying the variance requesting the 330 square foot addition. One of the items that was brought up in the appeal was that the hearing officer did request a photo of the garage interior showing 2 parked vehicles. Further, the appellant noted that, or in this case, the hearing officer, that having this information would help the case as it relates to the variance request and make the necessary findings. Ultimately, the hearing officer denied the variance request without having that photo that was requested. And for reference, the photo was submitted after the case was denied. The applicant did hand deliver the photo, which is noted on the panel behind you.
And it was also in the packets that were...
That is correct. And the applicant did also provide in that packet that I believe you also received in this binder that shows an email communication showing that he did attempt to email it electronically. And I just want to highlight that because that is also mentioned in the report. However, it was not received by staff at that time. Staff believes that all 4 findings can be made in a positive manner and therefore recommends that the Planning Commission reverse the zoning hearing officer's decision and approve the variance request based on the following rationale, and that would be the 4 required findings that need to be made. The variance is justified on the basis that the strict application of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship in that location because of the oak tree, which precludes the expansion of the garage. To require that 20-foot width for the garage by denying the requested variance would require, again, removal of the oak tree, which would be inconsistent with preserving the native plant life and the associated ecosystem that currently exists and supports on site. The location of the trees at the rear yard are a unique condition applicable to the property, and different options were explored originally, but in order to make the situation work or code compliant, it would result in additional code issues, or in this case zoning code issues, which would again would undermine the existing site conditions. Some of those items would be, again, removal of the tree, would require demolishing or may require demolishing the existing garage, and it would require widening the existing driveway at the rear and, again, removing the existing landscaping and possibly removing a portion of the addition at the rear. The proposal would not be detrimental to the public welfare since the addition at the to the existing house is similar to other uses in the community. And the positives in this case outweigh the negative. Again, it's not detrimental. The applicant has attempted to improve the situation, being the history that this case has, especially from a code enforcement standpoint. The one-story addition will be located at the rear of the house and will not create additional zoning code violations, again, as it relates to height, setbacks, or lot coverage. And finally, it would not be contrary to the objectives of the ordinance, legalizing the addition while not providing the 2 covered enclosed parking spaces would allow preservation of existing on-site conditions that would be in the tree in the open space. And for those reasons, staff does believe that the findings can be made in favor of this case. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I am available to answer them.
Questions for the staff at this time? Mr. Lee?
I know in the report that you did not have a specific date or the history of this addition that,
That is correct.
Is still the case?
Still the case. The only record, again, that we have is from the LA County Assessor's Office as to when the house was built. We don't have original, at least to my knowledge, original permits for that addition. The only thing that we have was a permit that was issued for roofing over the existing patio. So one is led to believe that, again, they enclosed the existing covered, or in this case, the existing patio.
Because I noticed that part of the main house, paint was all peeling off, and the addition was kind of intact. So I'm wondering, really, the addition or the enclosed patio area is most recent, addition. And I guess this all has to be brought up to code, obviously, and then it has to go through the city inspection program and all that.
Correct, and I know that the applicant has been diligently working with our building department, and they have received certain permits. If you've noted in one of the photos that was submitted in the packet, it shows how the house has been refurbished or remodeled, especially from the exterior. He's also included photos of the interior. I did actually conduct a field inspection recently of the site from the exterior and noted the changes and the windows and the painting that has taken place as well. So definitely improvements have been made on the property compared to the dilapidated conditions that existed prior to.
And I agree with you. Now, I guess all these things would not have triggered if that enclosure did not happen.
That is correct.
So all this, the oak tree comes into picture, and all this, two-car garage requirement, it's all because of this illegal addition to the property.
That is correct, because it does require permits. And once again, once you've, in this case, added to a property and not obtained or secured the proper permits, everything gets triggered, and in this case, parking.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're trying to justify something that from the beginning was illegal to start with.
That is correct.
Just so I can clarify, is the addition, it's not the one with the fireplace, is it? The addition includes the fireplace? Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at floor plan, it basically goes wall to wall.
Okay.
I guess I would, if I could have a moment there.
Certainly.
I'd like a little more detail on what the permitting process would entail should this go forward. I mean, the way, if I look at the pictures, there's a lot of work to be done on the whole structure.
Correct.
Relative to windows and structure and
Well, they actually have already received a window permit, haven't
Right.
Right.
They have received window permits, and I know that for a fact because I signed off on the window permits. So this is the more recent photo that was included in your packet. We did show or include at the time, we didn't have this. So we included the photos that were submitted for the original zoning administrator's hearing. However, I don't know exactly which permits they still need to secure, so I will defer that question to the applicant.
Makes sense. Anything else right now, Mr. Sheets?
No, sir.
All right. We'll move on to the appellant. Mr. Warner, you have 15 minutes to go through your case.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking time away from your home and families. I've served in similar capacities in the city of Burbank, so I know when you're receiving little or no pay, the greatest joy you can get is you have fun with your job, and it looks like you do. So thank you much for your time tonight.
Well, of course, you're talking about Burbank. We're, a lot more sophisticated here in Glendale.
I was going to say that.
I'm actually.
Didn't give you time.
I'm frankly, sir, and we'll continue your time. I'm shocked you even brought up. And for the record,
Decent point,
And
huh?
for the record, please state your name.
Yeah, I'm Brett Warner, owner of the property. Property was purchased by myself and my two boys in June 22nd of '09, and obviously we got a little bit more than we bargained for, but we went into the structure and saw that it was tagged and shut down by the code enforcement people, and for good reason based upon the history of this site. It was probably public enemy number one for that period of time in the city of Glendale, I imagine. So we went in and immediately secured the property, closed everything up per the code enforcement. We met with code enforcement day one, figured, hey, what are the issues here so we really know what they are. Dealt with them as we could, as fast as we could to secure the house. Met with the police department, gave them full responsibility to make their own actions and respond on our behalf should there ever be a complaint on there. Filed the necessary paperwork and all that. So it got done. It got done well. Some of the letters we had on there, which kind of demonstrate what the history of the property was, is in one of the sections on the police report. And this is a letter from Sue Shine that I had back, and I guess for a period of a year there were 26 calls onto the property, including high-risk calls, foot pursuits, assault, gang activities, neighbor living, just a whole lot of things that were obviously not conducive, and no calls after the time we took ownership of the property in June. She had actually she ended her thing by thanking us sincerely for improving the safety of my officers and the quality of life for the residents. And I think most of the residents on the block who I deal with a lot, because they come by when I'm over there, I take myself over there and my kids, because it was a project for my kids and a learning experience, because they're 18 and 19, and I wanted them to learn something before they went on to college. They've learned a lot through this process, more than I bargained for. In any case, the code enforcement people obviously threw the book at this house, and for good reason, because of the activity on it. And I think we were left to deal with the aftermath. And hopefully we've done so to the satisfaction of all the departments who were involved in these issues. The structure was built in the 20s. This rear addition of 15 by 22, I think it is, was probably best anticipated built in the 40s. There was a re-roof permit for that structure, a re-roofing permit in 52. So, and that's in the packet. So I'm only presuming that it was built in the 40s. When we went through the structure itself and peeled off the walls to get to the framing, it looked like the framing and the footings of that, including the fireplace, was consistent with 1950s construction. So it's probably, safe to assume that when they got the re-roof permit, right after that they probably converted the facility. But that's a guess. But the framing was consistent with that, as well as the fireplace. So when we went into the project, that back consisted of a den, which included the fireplace, and a bedroom off to the side, and there was a demising wall dividing the two. There were people living in it the day I walked in it, and sleeping there. So we asked him to leave. We hired one guy who seemed like he was a good kid, going to college, carrying a full load, and a grade A student. So, he worked for us for about a month. We had pulled permits for a lot of the work. We jumped the gun and pulled a lot of permits on the thing, just because we were trying to save time and get a family in there by the end of the summer, which was the goal. It was obviously apparent, but with the challenges that we had to go through, that we weren't going to make that date, but we tried to get as much done with the house as we possibly could. The house is completely done today, including the addition, and I'll do whatever it takes to see that everybody's satisfied with it, but it's been totally redone inside and out. We've stopped work on the garage, pending what we're going to do moving forward. If we can go ahead and refurbish the garage to make it consistent with the house, that's what we would like to do. Again, I appreciate Mr. Krause's time in hearing the original thing. The words about the appeal, exceeded responsibility, or things are in your pre-printed form. But so it's I have all respect for your time in hearing the original case. I think what was relevant to the case was that we demonstrated, we kind of relied, the original report was kind of skewed against an oak tree. We had a lot of other issues, but the report itself was skewed. I think some of the discussion around the hearing was skewed against an oak tree, and let it be known, the arborist, I think the city arborist, kind of said, take it down. It's like, okay, it was, kind of unexpected, and we should have prepared the other findings that we thought probably would have made a better case than an oak tree. But nevertheless, it exists on the site, along with this Brazilian pepper tree, which are probably 20, and the pepper tree is probably 50 years old. Both would have to come down if we build a new garage, and I'll go over that, because we've done concept to see what we could do if we were going to be forced to comply and put a new car garage in order to salvage the addition, okay, which is part of a house. It's a family house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. It's a small lot. It's a 50 by 100 lot. I probably believe that's probably your minimum lot size in the city of Glendale, or pretty close, so it's a very tough lot to deal with. But, I think Mr. Krause had referenced the other 5 houses. This is a subject house. You see there are 5. There's actually 7 houses going down to Verdugo. And all 7 houses have ranges of lot coverage ratio of 24 to 27, up to 30 and 40 and 55%. Our lot is 26%. Okay, so it's a low lot coverage ratio, even inclusive of the 330 square feet that we're trying to permit. It has an open space ratio, or open space requirement right now of 35%, which exceeds the 25%. If we build a new 2-car garage with the required setbacks on a small lot to salvage the house with the addition, which is our full intent, we need to have a 5-foot setback with a 20 by 20 garage and come in and sweep and pull it in off the side. So a lot of hardscape, and then what that forces do is to go down a lot coverage or open space landscape requirement down to about 24%, just falling slightly just below 24%, which is not to code. So that's the only scheme that works. I can't do it coming in, because when you come in, tear down the existing garage. That's going to happen regardless if we're forced to do that. But if you come in, the setbacks are not adequate right now. There's 3 feet and 2 feet, which is actually greater than the other houses of the same era, and every house in there is the same area of the 20s. But to back out of that, not only do you hit the addition, which isn't a factor because it's illegal, but it hits part of the permanent house, which was originally permitted. So the only angle to really come in is to come in, turn, do a 90-degree into it. And basically, for my standpoint, as a family house, I now have a hardscaped house, which is a family house, 3-2 garage. So, which doesn't meet the open space requirement in an R1650 zone of 25%, if I'm correct in that. So our lot coverage ratio is one of the smallest in the block. Okay, our landscape requirement right now is the greatest in the block. It's the greatest. Okay, because there's the lot coverage in the houses in the area, which are on the same 5,000 foot lot, or 40 to 50%, most of them 30%. So with single car garages. So when it talks about are we consistent with the area, are we getting any more betterment by deviating from this? The fact of the matter is, the other houses in the area, 5 of these 7 have single car garages, okay, and have greater lot building coverage than we do. 1 has no garage. The other 2 have probably substandard because they were built in the 20s and 30s. It's not to say that we have a condition that is in fact illegal. Probably got thousands of them in the city, okay? But I think code enforcement threw the book at these guys to solve a situation, and what we believe and what Mr. Krause had asked for, because when we went to the hearing and said, look, there's a 2-car garage, he'd requested, can you send me proof of that? Send me that. And Ms. Toledo sent me an email before she left on vacation. I said, please CC Mr. Krause on your email so I can reply to both of you. I replied to both of them on the 21st. I had a confirmation on the receipt, which is in your package, but it's my fault I didn't follow up on an electronic reliance. When I had heard when she came back on Monday the 18th that it was not received, I copied it that night, sent it in the morning, which was the Tuesday, the 18th. He had, I think Mr. Krause had already written his letter the day before, and it was in typing and went out that day. So I was a little late on my follow-up. That was my fault for the reliance on the electronic email. But the fact of the matter is, we have a two-car garage. I think that the real hardship for myself, the compromise of the yard in the back, for the disturbance of the neighborhood, which is primarily a lot of multifamily housing, is more construction. They've all been pretty patient with what we've done. We've kind of kept the level of noise down. They're all ready for it to be over. They're all grateful that it looks better and that the element is a lot better, and there will be a family moving in, into the house sometime shortly, whatever we decide. So we had relied on the fact that we thought we had support from planning about the 4 conditions met. We have the stalled. If you read the Public Works comment about the parking, they say, yeah, there's 2-car garages. We have 60 feet of driveway, so we have enough for 5 cars. There's not one car on that block that has room for 5-car parking. And I think that the intent of the code, of the law, is to provide off-site parking. And when you have an alley behind your parking, you can swing right off the alley. You have great lot coverage, but you have a 2-car garage. When you have to come through with no alley, you have the driveway, but we have potentially 5 cars. And it's probably not relevant. Nobody uses their car for cars. They store it. But we have a 2-car garage, and it's a fact that it exists. But it's not the typical code requirement as of today, even though it was built in the 40s, non-permitted or otherwise. We have a 2-car garage that can accommodate 2 cars, with the garage closed, the garage door closed, and including, the driveway. So this will not be a hardship for the neighborhood. It won't cause, and if you read the Public Works comments, he's kind of in concurrence, shouldn't cause a problem. There's a problem on that block, okay, no doubt about it, because it's a lot of multifamily housing, some housing built with no parking, okay? But this house will not create an issue or exacerbate any parking issues that deal with the site. I'm just reading my notes to make sure I cover everything. Item number C was not an issue. Anyway, that's pretty. There's a lot of other facts in the thing. The letters we were able to comply with the recommendations of the planning department for not the reversal. I didn't see those, but the original ones. We're fine with that. We've already done these. Okay, so there are no real issues that we haven't already dealt with, which include the code enforcement. We had code enforcement through the property. They were happy. They said it looks good, subject to the pending of, what you do with the garage, and you can finish up. The tree planting has been done in accordance with the arborist. The project, we have here, project shall obtain a design review. I didn't really think that the design review was necessary on an existing garage, because we're going to paint it and put new windows on it. So it's not an exercise I really want to do if you so inclined to approve the garage as it exists today. And then, so you obviously have the police, the neighborhood services comments after their inspection. You have their photos, so you can see what's been done to it. You do have at least the email that shows we tried to comply with Mr. Krause's request, but we failed to follow up, and that's our fault. And the conditions really of the site. I mean, these are really the two things that I did were, plans showing what with the required radius of 25 feet from the garage, what do I hit? And when I hit an existing house, not the patio, but the existing house, I said, well, I got to go through a CUP. Don't want to do it. So the only really one that worked was the one that you go right, and that works. But to me, that's just a shame. To take a family home and put it hardscape, when there's already a 2-car garage there. Got to do it. But, it just means more construction for the thing, and the fact that the 2-car garage exists right now, and and that it doesn't meet the standard of a lot of the open space. You know, it just falls shy of the open space by about 1%. Not a big deal, but we're compromising 11% of open space. It's landscape space that we have right now that we'd surely like to preserve. And I didn't have letters. I have letters of support. I didn't have time to put them in package because I mailed them out, and they started coming back after I was required to get you the thing. If you want them, I've made copies for you. They weren't mailed to so many people because most people are absentee landlords with their own apartments. The people who have homes replied in support. Some didn't reply, you know. But all have come by, and, you know, we're happy with at least not so much the house, but probably the issues that exist before don't exist today. So this is how it exists today. Obviously, this is the rear addition, the fireplace. This was there probably since the 40s, but today it's a bedroom, a bath, and a closet. It's the master suite, you know, and that's how it exists today. It has all been inspected. It has all been reviewed by, that's what it's planning, but the building inspector. So, and the building inspector reviewed everything. Okay, he came and he saw the sign. He says, well, you haven't got approval of this. He said, but I'm going to look at it since you got the walls open. Check your plumbing. He said, all right, you're fine, you're fine. And he allowed us to close it up. He said, you can close it up pending what you do. So it's all been looked at. You know, we haven't done anything that was tried to be sneaky. We've done it a little premature, you know, in order to save time, but you know, we did everything above board as best we possibly could. Questions?
Mr. Lee?
Yes. Yeah. Also, and I guess that's the part that I wanted to get to is that, so obviously I looked at your photo before and after, and you've made a great improvement to the property. And you said you had inspectors come out to inspect, but I thought that you did not have a plan into plan check, an approved plan for inspectors to reference the improvements to. So I don't know. So what, is it verbal approval, or I mean, what type of approval?
We pulled a permit.
Oh, you did?
For refurbishment.
Okay.
For new HVAC, for new wiring.
And plumbing, electrical, everything?
Everything, yeah. And that's what was inspected. Now, it was pulled through a remodel, a refurbishment permit, so it wasn't new construction because I was supposed to. Maybe I should have, but it wasn't.
That's not only for the addition, but for the main house
For the
as well.
main house,
yeah,
kitchen,
right,
everything.
But then, you know, that portion of the addition is not really legalized addition. But
it's not legalized.
But that is part of the record of the inspection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you took a great chance.
You know, it's not, you know, I mean, I know that law is a law, and, you know, I try to make common sense. I'm in commercial real estate, so, you know, and I've been on a planning board, you know, but it was just something we tried to do with my boys and said, let's get in and let's fix this up and get one of the families we know in there and before the end of summer, and tried to make the best use of the time. Taking a chance, yes.
Other questions for the speaker?
Just one point of clarification, I think it was already answered. The same process, should this go forward as is, the same process would occur on the garage as far as submitting permit requests and identifying the improvements and having them.
Yeah, there's not much to do. I'll do whatever I'm directed to do because I'll paint it. It was part of the window change out, so we changed the windows in it to be consistent with the windows we put in the front of the house. It was just I had to order 20 windows, so 2 more windows. I just wanted to get them there and in. So it'll just be paint, maybe a new garage door, an automatic door. I haven't figured out whether that's going to be consistent with the architecture or not.
That's my only question.
Well, I guess I'm going to raise. I'm sorry. Did you have anything? Not yet.
I have something from staff.
And I'll raise it with you and continue it with staff, and then you may want to continue the discussion that I'll start now with your rebuttal period. I'm looking through the analysis, and I'm a little confused by something, and it looks like it may be when they were maybe overriding the old conditions to the new ones, and staff turning a 180 on where they were originally to where they are now. But on page 2 of the analysis, it notes that the city's urban forester concluded that the oak tree, and we're talking about the oak tree immediately adjacent to the garage, appeared to have been indiscriminately pruned in the past. The resulting canopy was not reflective of a sustainable tree structure, and she recommended removing and replacing the oak tree. So in one of the arguments, or not maybe one of the arguments, one of the sentiments about saving a tree and saving, foliage in the yard and things like that seems to be negated by what the city's urban forester said herself. And related to that, it's only a foot away from the garage, so it's clearly impacting the garage, if not the wall, certainly the foundation. So it seems to me like this oak tree has a very finite lifespan, if very long at all.
Well, do you want me to respond to that now? Or?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
It's the whole reason of the appeal. I didn't want to talk about the tree. There was, for me, more issues that are more relevant than the tree, especially given her position on the tree, which I was surprised about, but because the tree is healthy. It's not, we have pruned it since. I mean, if you go out there now, we pruned all the trees. So it has a good canopy, and it is pretty, and I don't know how old a 16-inch tree is, but 20 years, I don't know. I'm not a tree person, but it's doing well. It's half of the drip line is exposed to grass, okay? Half of it is under the slab, but it's doing well. I don't think it's compromised in any way. I think her position really was that, if you need to take it down, we don't have a problem having you take it down. Just replace it. Go plant a new tree somewhere else. For me, in California oaks, it's like, why would you take a 16-inch tree down? Unless it's damaged. If it shows that if it's dying, yeah. But if you go out there right now, that's a live tree. There's no distress in that tree at all. And we pruned it, so it had a better canopy and had a better, because neither of the trees, especially the Brazilian pepper tree, was a disaster. So they're both true. So I don't know about that. I'm not relying on that.
Well, then two comments on that. Then, so one of the potential arguments somebody might make would be, it's great to keep the garage because then you won't have to cut down the tree.
Yeah.
And again, that's just one of the arguments. It's not all of your arguments, but I'm just noting that the city says the tree ought to go down anyway. You're saying the tree looks healthy to you, and you have no intention of taking it down.
Yeah, I think she should go out there again. I think she should take a second look at it. I don't think she took a good look at it, to begin with. I'm not too sure, but it was, if you go out there now, there's nothing wrong with
right.
it.
And I only bring it up because there's other issues as you related to the setbacks that would be required on the garage, the size of the garage, access. There's other points too, but again, I guess I'm just saying that if there was any argument related to the tree, it seems like that one's gone. So the fact that you're saying you kind of even ignored it as an argument makes sense. If you're
I've ignored it, but I don't agree with it.
Okay.
I think if you go out there, go onto the property, it's open. I mean, that's a good-looking tree. It's too darn close to the garage, yes. And was probably a wild tree.
How old is the
wild oaks are wild?
All right. What's the slab look like in the garage? Is it cracked, broken?
No, it's intact.
Is it more recent? It must be a fairly recent slab.
No, it's not. I don't know whether the roots just didn't surface like they might normally do.
I'm surprised it hasn't heaved.
It looks to me there's a slab that's at 30% of the way. That garage looks like it may have been expanded. I don't know. That's only a judgment, because there is a crack in the slab that goes this way. That's consistent with a pour, another pour. But it's. I mean, that garage is, I think, the age of the house, all the way through.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for the speaker at this time? All right, you'll have a rebuttal period shortly.
Thank you.
We'll turn back again to staff. I'm sorry, I have no other speaker cards. I guess we'll turn to staff, and I'm sure that first, Mr. Kraus, I'd like to hear from you as it relates to you being the original officer.
Yes,
and I'm
thank you.
sure along with the commission, we're kind of interested in the change of direction from your original findings.
Well, Chairman Kay, members of the Planning Commission, I haven't changed direction at all. I just wasn't in agreement with the recommendation. So let me, before I elaborate on the findings, let me just clear up the issue about the photograph. The plans indicate a clear space of 12 by 30, so I knew at the time of the hearing that you could fit 2 small cars in there. The only purpose of the photograph was to verify that the plans were in fact accurate, because many times our applicants don't show a lot of details inside such buildings. So it wasn't that that didn't make or break the decision. It was just to get something into the record to reflect consistency with the plans, again, based on previous experience. That's all. With regard to the findings, let me elaborate on that. As we know, the burden of proof, according to the code, on variance cases is on the applicant, and I just didn't feel there was enough to work with other than the third finding not being detrimental that I made in their favor. So with regard to the hardship issue, the key thing is application of the code isn't supposed to result in a hardship that's inconsistent with the general purposes and intent of the ordinance. That doesn't mean that complying with the code is supposed to be easy or that there isn't some difficulty involved. So in this case, there are other options that are available, some of them more difficult than others. What was approved was a 2-bedroom house and then the patio. So maintaining, my position was there was no evidence to indicate that maintaining the original 2-bedroom house with a patio was in itself a hardship. So there are many 2-bedroom units in that neighborhood, in that zone, and throughout the city of Glendale. So that by itself wasn't a hardship. Relying on the fact that the addition was already constructed, as we all know, that's a self-imposed hardship. You have much more flexibility when you design something before it gets built. Obviously, this was done a long time ago, but nevertheless, permits were never obtained for the enclosure. Testimony at my hearing indicated that the applicant, without getting a building permit, had already replaced the easterly wall along the driveway from 2x3s to 2x4s and had already put in the rough plumbing for the bathroom, again, prior to even my initial hearing on this. So not everything is even the way it was a few months ago. The property does look better, but that's a given that it should be like that anyway. The second finding is often the crux of a variance case, the fact that there are exceptional circumstances applicable. This lot, 50 by 100, not an uncommon size. There was an indication that it doesn't meet the minimum lot size. There, in fact, is no minimum lot size for this particular zone. In the R1 zone, we allow houses to be built on lots that are at least 5,000 square feet, so that's not unusual. There are other properties, as the appellant indicated, right next door down the block that are the same size, developed in much the same manner. And what, again, a variance essentially is providing relief from the code to give the subject property the same benefits that are enjoyed by other similar properties in the same zone or neighborhood. So in this case, would providing only having a one-car garage with the addition, would that be consistent with what everybody else has, or would be treated? So if the neighbor came along and wanted to add, they would be subject to the same rules. So it's really questionable whether this really is a unique situation. Again, the existence of an oak tree in and of itself doesn't create a hardship, or a tree
as Chairman Kane has already pointed out, not only do we not have an objection to getting rid of the oak tree, it was actually recommended, although I tend to agree with the applicant that it's not in as bad a shape as that report would have you believe now that it's been trimmed again. But as Chairman Kane pointed out, it's obviously a volunteer and it's right next to the wall. So the house is a two-bedroom house legally. There are two-bedroom houses all over Glendale, two-bedroom dwelling units and apartments all over Glendale and in that neighborhood. That doesn't make it unique. Houses with one-car garages exist throughout Glendale and throughout that zone. That's not unique. So there are no factors that spring out at you as to why this should be treated differently. And this is a very common situation. Additions to single-family houses is about the most common project type that we have. So this particular rule comes into play all the time. So the question is, why treat this one differently? You've got a tight parking situation in the neighborhood, so why would you want to provide relief in this situation when the neighborhood is already congested? Because it's already congested, I think I was able to make the third finding that it wouldn't be detrimental because you can't get more full than full. For the most part, there's very little on-street parking available. There's a fire hydrant in front of the property, so you can actually park one car on the street. But part of the time, a good part of the time, the street is full of parking, which would make jockeying back and forth, if you wanted to jockey tandem cars in and out, you'd really need two people to effectively do that at various times of the day. Then finding D, why would granting the variance not be in contrary to the objectives? Well, the objectives are to upgrade non-conforming situations, non-conforming parking when you're adding. This goes back to the origins of the parking requirements in the 1950s, and we've had many opportunities to make changes to limit things to that have limit projects that have a one-car garage. That's okay. That's never happened. The only thing that has happened is the administrative exception process was added a few years ago to allow people to add less than 100 square feet for minor additions without providing the extra parking when there are space limitations. That's the only time the space limitations issue comes into play. Space limitations is almost never grounds for a variance. If it were, you would have dozens of situations that you could justify that on. I won't go into all of them, but it's rather obvious. Even if you build a new building, well, I don't have room to provide those 5 extra parking spaces because my lot's too small. I can't get that extra unit because my lot's too small. And the idea that providing the 2-car garage would perhaps impact some other code standards, that's entirely possible, but you have to meet them all. It's not that if I can't meet one or two, I don't have to meet the others. It's not a trade-off situation. I've seen for the first time on the binder that you got the future garage layout, and one has the 90-degree turn and one has the straight in. I don't really understand his 25-foot radius, the way he's drawn it. I don't think that's accurate. If you built a conforming 2-car garage in the back to replace the existing garage and had 5-foot setbacks, you would impact the existing building, but only a portion of the illegal addition. It would not cut into the legal portion of the house as was indicated by the appellant. That would not happen. So all you'd be modifying is part of what isn't legal to start with. There are other options, again, one of them being leaving the project alone and living with a 2-bedroom house. Again, the two main arguments related to the tree and the space limitations, as I think I've tried to explain, neither one in and of themselves are legitimate grounds in a variance situation of this kind. Also, the code was amended not too many years ago to provide for a parking reduction permit process to deal with reduction in number of parking spaces. So that's a process that was instituted to try and get away from the variance process for parking. But in this case, the applicant has chosen to apply for a variance. So with that, I'll just stop and ask if you have any questions.
Mr. Lee?
Looking at this, the first drawing where you have shown the 25-foot radius, if you leave the structure the way it is, what radius would you have?
It'd be a 25-foot radius, and it would cut about into the middle of the addition.
A middle of, so you don't take out
Part of the addition, yes.
Now, what happens if you leave it intact? How much of it?
If you leave it intact, well, it wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to get into the the westerly parking space. It wouldn't physically work.
So
Just the driveway, the corner of the house would be blocking your ability to actually get into unless you drove into the westerly parking space first,
right.
No car, backed up, jockey that, then you put the other one in. Of course, you'd have to come out in a reverse manner, and then you'd have to jockey back and forth. Very inconvenient. That's why we have the 25-foot turning radius, which, by the way, is very tight. If you're backing out and you've got an actual building there, even the code is very tight, not really comfortable if you have to make too much of a turn.
There's a enclosed parking garage that allows two cars to be in tandem. Is that even considered?
Yes,
Is that even
Commissioner,
considered a two-parking garage?
No, this one isn't. The only tandems that we recognize in residential situations are single-family houses over 3,500 square feet for the third, fourth, and fifth required spaces. The first two always have to be independently accessible. Then if you had, let's say you had a 3,600 square foot house, brand new, your third space could be tandem, but it would also have to be 20 feet deep. So 20 plus 20 equals 40. This is 30 feet deep. Again, you can see you can only get smaller cars.
Certain cars, yeah.
Right. So the code does recognize tandem in residential, single family, only for the third space and above. The first two have to be independently accessible.
Any other questions for staff at this time? Or at least for Mr. Kraus? Okay, then I'd like to hear a little bit more. Staff verbalized it a little bit, but it's kind of unusual. I can only remember one other time where staff had something happen and they decided they needed to go in another direction. So why don't you walk me through a little bit just through the process. Mr. Kraus issued his findings, or whoever would like to, but Mr. Kraus issued his findings, his decision. I presume then that the appellant came in and started talking with Mr. Kraus or someone else. Who, do we know? Mr. Foy?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify that this case planner makes a recommendation to the hearing officer. Usually it's a zoning administrator, or there's a substitute one, in this case, Mr. Kraus. She originally recommended approval of the variance. Mr. Kraus disagreed, but upon appeal, she was again free to recommend her own opinion again.
Thank you.
She did not.
All right. Thank you. So this was a case, Mr. Ghani.
And if I may, this is a topic that even among planning staff, we actually have a lot of debate. And I personally had a conversation with Mr. Kraus about the issue, not necessarily this particular case, and that because the way that the code is written, in a way, puts some of the older properties that are in smaller lots at a situation, in somewhat of a disadvantage against, say, in comparison to the properties which are in a place on larger lots and they're fairly newer homes. So that, and then oftentimes from a socioeconomic standpoint, usually the people who need to add to their properties to accommodate larger families tend to be in smaller homes in older parts of the city, and that brings a big policy discussion. And Mr. Kraus reminded me that we have tried to bring that policy discussion forward to the Planning Commission twice in the past in our discussions with the Zoning Code Advisory Group, because we have actually raised it before, that this particular policy, that all standards need to be upgraded based on some changes to the property, really puts those older properties at a disadvantage. And the Zoning Code Advisory Group has been as divided on this as staff have been. And in the past, they haven't made a recommendation for us to bring a policy change forward. So the policy has stood despite the fact that staff has tried to change it a couple of times, to tell you the truth. There's a history behind it. So it's not uncommon for you to have a hearing officer who makes a decision and then have a case planner who may completely disagree with the hearing officer's decision, and that puts you in a tough position as well, and we understand that.
So you don't consider that insubordination, you consider that healthy?
We consider that a very healthy debate, and we encourage it, in fact.
All right. Well, how unlike some other cities. So basically what's happened, and thank you for clarifying it. So basically what's happened is we've seen a staff disagreement where one person just in the hierarchy, went in a different direction than another person, and now we have the appellant process, and the four of us up here get to weigh in as well. All right? Okay. Any other questions for staff? Mr.
Yeah,
Green?
one clarification. So if we, let's say, deny this here, then that addition comes off. Is what it is? Because I guess with the addition intact, you have no equation for complying garages there.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think what happens is either the addition comes off, or they have to try to figure out a way to place a garage on that site.
Well, I mean, from what that was one of the conversation I had, trying to see if that can qualify. But it sounds like half of that addition has to come up anyways to qualify to bring in two-car garage.
Shaking.
Say that again. I'm sorry. Who is shaking their head? Well, he'll have a rebuttal time. So okay, Ms. Toledo.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that option
Everyone
was
can be shaking
explored, and that's why I analyzed that when actually preparing the report and trying to make a recommendation. Presently, the garage is located 2 feet from the easterly property line and 3 feet from the rear property line. And as indicated earlier, it doesn't meet the 25-foot turn radius as it relates to ingress and egress. So the garage is non-conforming in terms of setback, turning radius, and size. So the code requires that the garage in that zone needs to have a 5-foot setback. So if we were to require, in order to access the garage with a straight design, it would require pushing back the garage further towards the rear in order to introduce the 25-foot turn radius. And facilitating the 25-foot turn radius would entail widening the driveway at the rear yard, again, removing a portion of the addition, or it has to go away completely, one of the two, but what we've heard is that a portion of it would go away, and removal of the existing landscape at the rear. Notwithstanding, we understand the tree situation. Obviously, one or both trees would go away. So, again, the recommendation still stands that they don't need to preserve the oak tree. It was just a recommendation because it wasn't mandatory. That's why staff used that as an argument that that is a unique condition currently on the site. But the point, again, is not only the landscaping would be impacted because they wouldn't meet code. One of the objectives that is noted in the finding number 4, is that they have to have a certain amount of open space, and that would be undermined as well. So the other option was to design the garage in 90-degree ingress, which would, again, require removal of the trees, losing the large portion of the rear yard, again, impacting, or in this case, affecting that one, not meeting that one condition or finding. So regardless if the garage is designed in a 90-degree axis or straight ingress with a 25-foot turn radius, one or both trees or different areas of the code would be impacted. So you would have, instead of just having one item, in this case one zoning violation, you would have a laundry list, or in this case multiple issues that would be impacted.
Potential variance.
Exactly. So we felt that, sure, you can try to make findings for one item, but justifying multiple variances, that makes the situation a little bit more difficult because it doesn't show an effort of good faith in trying to improve the situation and being in compliance with the code as much as possible.
But that is, the argument is, you're arguing the fact that you are leaving that addition intact.
That is correct.
And that's what's causing all this, argument right now, the issues. So if, let's say, this board decides to, that was illegal addition anyways.
It could go away.
Right.
And the
Then-
other option that they would, I don't know how much of it would have to go away. That hasn't been something that staff has explored. But let's say they maintain at least 100 square feet, then we wouldn't even be here today. They can have a 100-square-foot addition and maintain the existing garage as is,
Except it's a
through an administrative exception process.
Except it's a 330 square foot addition.
That is correct. So they're about 230 square feet over.
And I don't want to get into deliberations yet. We still have a hearing. But just as a signal, I think that whole idea, we've been talking about the garage, I think the whole idea really needs to focus on the addition. And should it have been approved? And I think that as we enter deliberations, that's going to be part of my thought process. And I would just throw that out in case, in terms of rebuttal time, if there's anything you want to do to address that, it might be helpful to your case. Since it's about to start any second, and that gives you plenty of time to prepare for it. Other questions or comments related to staff comments?
Well, my question is, what is the precedence as far as with additions being made before property being purchased and the permits were not granted at the time? And what's the precedence as far as what's happened after that?
Board Member Yasai and members of the commission, the subsequent owner inherits the responsibility. Nothing changes because of ownership. Almost everything that you deal with at this level is about the what and the where and not the who. So regardless of the ownership doesn't really matter. If it did, things would be completely different in the world of land use.
And I think owner was aware that he was taking the risk as well.
You will find, Board Member Commissioner Usayan, that you don't see all of them, but you'll see the decisions, that the zoning administrator decisions, and you'll get some appeals, and you'll get some initial use variance applications now. There's often a good percentage of our cases are related to things that are already done, either construction, could be an addition, could be a wall or fence, could be a use, could be a sign. So it's not uncommon to have something already done. Sometimes it was done recently. In this case, it was obviously done a few decades ago. You'll have more of those in the foreseeable future to deal with. At least one much more significant than this one. So it's not uncommon.
Mr. Sheets?
Well, we have you.
Did you want to talk about North Glendale, or do you want to talk about...
Maybe later. Point of clarification, you mentioned earlier about your perception that the radius on one of the drawings in the package.
Right, the straight-in approach.
Okay.
That's not how you do a 25-foot
Right, that one
grade.
didn't work.
You know that.
Now on the other one,
The other one,
which is
okay.
the 90 degree, is that one, you weren't speaking about that one as far as...
That one's not right either.
Okay.
It's from the edge of the garage door. The farthest edge of the garage door is where you start to... So the second one is close, but it's not quite right. The first one is completely wrong.
Okay. And then you could help me on if we go the 90 degree example. What other variances or variations would occur relative to this setup?
Landscaping.
So we would lose the landscaping.
They're required to have, I believe it's 25% landscaping.
Right.
And, of course, open space, which is part of the landscaping. And that's why we have setback requirements as well.
Okay. That's fine for me.
All right. Any other questions for staff at this time?
So, again, for clarification purposes, so for the 90-degree, 25-foot radius, seems like, that's the least, I guess, affecting the existing property as far as making the turn. But you lose that landscaping. So is that the only variance that
I don't know if it's the only, I mean, that's the only major one that actually sticks out. I just don't know if there's, again, setback issues, because they also have to have the 5-foot, as I alluded to earlier, and they also require 5-foot eave to eave, so I don't know if they can meet that as well. And as far as lot coverage, I'm not sure if they'll be able to meet that. Because right now, the garage is obviously 300 some, believe, square feet.
If you do the math, it's close.
It's very close.
They'll be close into maxing the revenue.
Which again defeats the purpose of open space as well.
Okay, if there's nothing else for staff with this, Mr. Foy.
Yes, I'm sorry to throw one more thing at you. Well, actually, two things. This, I would note that this is a multifamily zone, so the setback requirements that Mr. Lito is talking about are different in this zone than they would be in a typical R1 zone, where detached garages are allowed up to the property lines. And secondly, I would also note that this property was included in the city's recent survey of craftsman houses in multifamily zones, and it was given a rating that it should be given special consideration for planning purposes. It was not considered worthy of landmark designation, but it noted that it did have some architectural merit as a craftsman house.
And also during the permitting process for the windows, staff did meet with our historic preservationist, Jay Platt, and was actually involved through the window permitting process. So that was taken into account.
I thought the preservation and all that, it was to preserve the original house, but, this one has, it's got a 330-foot addition.
Luckily, they were able to preserve the front wood windows because all the other windows were already gone, I believe, by the previous owners.
Actually, that was going to be my next question when you talk about preservation. What kind of windows went into that building? But okay. Anything else for staff right now?
Well, Mr. Foy just mentioned about the, building the garage right up to the property line now. What does that do to your...
Not in this case, because that only applies to garages that are located in single-family R1 or R1R zones. This is a multifamily zone. R1650.
1650, thank you. Right, so we're still dealing with variances depending on what goes on. All right, we can always go back to staff, but I'm going to allow the appellant his rebuttal period.
Well, thank you again. Some interesting issues. For clarification, I'm cut and dry, but for me, it's not about the addition. The addition's staying. If I got to build a new car garage, I'm going to find a way to do it. I'm going to comply with your request if that's what you want. It's a family house. It's this is planning. If we can't be flexible in planning, we're not really doing much planning in a city if we're following a book, for older houses. The unique situation here that the planning officer spoke about in his report, and which the Public Works Director referenced, was all based upon a single-car garage. Okay, now, it'll hold 2-car garage, but it was not given consideration by the Public Works. The Public Works comment is the lack of a second enclosed parking on the site could encourage the use of on-street parking. However, a total of 4 vehicles could be parked on the site in a single row, 1 vehicle in the garage plus 3 vehicles in tandem on a 12-foot driveway. We back out of our driveways every single time. I don't think that's a unique condition to this particular house. So this is not about exacerbating a problem on an existing city. If anything, we are the best house as far as providing on-site parking, not off-site parking, in this block. And this unique condition here is that we have a 2-car garage. We can ignore it from the standpoint that it is not code, okay? But you can't ignore it from the standpoint of planning and the fact that it exists, okay? That 2 cars do fit in there. Practically speaking, 2 cars can fit in there. The family will use it. And if we can't encourage, families to move into a 3-bedroom house, not a 2-bedroom house, to occupy our schools, I don't know what we're doing. Okay, that's just good planning from an overall standpoint, as far as I'm concerned. So I think that the objectives of the law was to provide off-street parking and encourage parking to come off-street and onto a home. Yes, in a structure. Yes, in a traditional garage of a 20 by 20, 400 square feet under current law, that's what we do. But we have a 360 square foot garage, 40 feet under, that can accommodate 2-car garage and 3 more in the driveway. If we're going to sit here and ignore that fact, we're wasting our time, okay? Because that seems very relevant to me, and to preserve a 3-bedroom house for a family. Yeah, it can be a 2-bedroom house, fine, good, but if we're encouraging, families to be moving into our city, and attend our schools, then, that's what we got. If any one of you came through that house today, you wouldn't know that was an addition, okay? It looks good. The outside wood that was 1920, I don't know when it was redone, but that wood on the outside of that house, front side, is the exact same wood that's on that addition, okay? So it's all been preserved, okay? And it was built to code. Okay, we had code people come out after we stripped off the interior wall. Yes, we did replace the driveway wall because it was a lot of 2x3. Okay, the thicker 2x3s, which is actually better construction than we have today. And the guy said this was built to code. Probably wasn't permitted. Obviously, you can't find a permit. Code enforcement couldn't find a permit, but it was built to code. Okay, we want you to do this, this, and this, and we did. We did everything that the guys, whether we were jumping the gun and spending time and money that we shouldn't have been, we did it, but we did it with the assistance of, the building department to say, what do you want us to do? We had a 4-foot eave distance between the two. He said, that's not really code. Okay, well, we have a 3-foot extension on eave. He said, whack it. We whacked it. We whacked it, got it in conformity so it looked good and consistent with the house. We did that, The radius, if Mr. Krause has come out there, I took a map. I plotted the setbacks 5 by 5, 20 by 20, and took a string line and pulled it. Now, my first meeting, I can't remember the guy's name in planning department, showed me how to do it. I went back to his office to reconfirm how you do it because I wanted to make sure it was done right, and he told me you don't take it from the corner, you take it from the entrance. This could be wrong. That's what I was told. You take it from the corner of the entrance, okay, one of the corners, okay, and you pull a line from the entrance, not the corner, but where you actually enter the garage and pull out, which makes sense, and you pull it. So I did that, okay, and it hit the house. It hit the addition, but it hit the house, so you permitted house. So the straight-in section did not appear to work. Now, if that's a wrong method, and I was told wrong, it's wrong. But that's what I was told by a planner. I wish I remember his name, but I don't. It'll come to me. So the only thing that I had, if you say, look, build a new car garage, we just can't find a unique condition here. It's going to be the 90 degree because the 90 degree works. The 90 degree meets the 25% radius. So what it does do is compromise the open space. So if it's a better notion to have less open space for a family home that falls below, that I have to come back and have another variance application, I don't know if it's in front of this board, then I'll do it, okay? But, I think the open space of going from a 35% open space to a 24% is much more valuable than having a 2-car garage that nobody will park in anyway. They'll park in the driveway, I know that's not relevant. I understand that. But I'm just from a practical standpoint, we have a 2-car garage. It's got to be the unique condition here, and the hardship would be to remove it and to replace a 2-car garage and eliminate the open space, of the site. If that ain't a hardship, I don't know what is. Okay, it's a hardship from a planning basis for me. It's a hardship for an ownership, of the lot. Yes, I inherited the illegal conditions, and I know that, and I've been doing my best to fix them. But as much as I respect Mr. Krause, I do not agree, with his staunch support on what he originally found. Okay, it's just there's a unique condition there. Okay, it's a unique house. The house has been preserved. If I got to build a modern garage and a craftsman house, I just don't see where it all ties together, where that seems like it's good planning, and, but hey, I respect what you do. I respect your decision. I'll do what I have. The addition staying, we put time and money in it. It's not the time or money, it's the fact that it's a good family home, okay? And that's what it's all about, So, if there's anything else I can discuss with you, have any questions of me, I think the findings, I can go over all the findings. I have all the findings, that I believe have been supported. And if I need to detail them so it's black and white, I'll spend another 5 or 10 minutes to do that, but only if you want me to. So if you think there's a lack of a finding before you make a ruling, please tell me. 'Cause I'm tired of talking. You want to go home.
All right.
So, any questions for me?
Questions for the appellant?
None.
Thank you
I
very
see
much.
none. Thank you very much, sir. Any closing remarks from staff? Other than what you've already stated.
Then no.
All right, very good. All right, we're going to close the public hearing. We'll enter deliberations, and we'll just see what people's initial thoughts are in terms of the variance. Who would like to go first? And I'm not gonna make the newest member do that.
Okay, I'll go.
So that leaves it up to two people. So, okay, Mr. Lee.
I'll go.
I thought I might have to pass the gavel.
The cases that come before the board here, it is interesting because there's nothing, it's always new things that you learn through this process. A strict interpretation of the code, obviously, would not work here. And, my, concern is that, as what Mr. Krause indicated, that, many people take advantage of circumventing the system and build additions and try to justify it at a later date, and we will do anything to stop that. But that property, I looked at the record of the history of this property, and that it's been an eyesore. It was a depleted property, and Mr. Warren made a considerable effort to bring this property, and it actually, better, the neighborhood by his effort, and remove all the conditions that's been written up by all the code enforcement officers. So I'm leaning towards actually approving the project as is and accepting the existing garage as a two-car garage.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Sheets, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'll start out by complimenting you and your sons on the effort. It's obviously been a benefit to the city and to the neighborhood, what's been done there, and eliminated quite a blight. But as usual, none of these issues are simple, and I can see both sides. It seems to me what's happening is there's a domino effect no matter which way we go. And one of my biggest concerns in all of these cases is the parking. And I think that part of the reasoning in trying to go back and fix these problems when they change hands is put some sense around how we grasp the parking issue and try to correct that and try to improve the city. My concerns here, in addition to the tight parking, tandem parking is not good. It just, I think in your experience in planning, tandem parking has a way of becoming a storage area, and it's not used. So, we have a picture that's evidence that it can work, but it's not something that I think is the best way to go. I don't think the tree is an issue. I think we've already have evidence that the trees can be moved. I have some concern about the 25-foot radius, but it looks like in the 90-degree configuration it's possible that we can meet that. I guess I would have a question if we are right now. Okay. My thought was around how do we incorporate the 90-degree picture into this, and it's really not what we're voting on here. So if I'm going to vote tonight relative to approving the illegal addition without the required 2 covered parking spaces, at this point in time, I'm leaning towards denying or sustaining the zoning hearing officer's decision, unless I hear something strong from the rest of the commissioners that makes me want to go the other way. It just seems that we're creating a domino effect that we really don't need, and I'm opposed to that. So that's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Sheets. Mr. Yosian.
Well, I'm going to echo what the previous commissioner said. Also, as far as the job done, I'm impressed. The building looks much better, especially with the condition that was before. To me, it just doesn't make sense. As far as I visited this property and I looked at the driveway and I couldn't even figure out how the 90-degree, the 2 parking structure would be able to be built behind the addition. And just for me, as far as making 2 parking spots, a two-car garage behind this house, building a new one just doesn't make any sense when you already have that one parking garage. Although I understand why it's a big deal as far as trying to comply, but if we do deny this today, and there would need to be another variance just to build another parking garage, and it would take away the yard space in the back, and it would also cause an impact to the neighbors because of additional construction. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I might be wrong, but that's just how I see it. So because of that, I would approve it.
Anything else?
No.
All right. I wasn't sure. We haven't worked long enough together for me to know how your pattern of speech is. All right. Okay. Here's the way I approach it, is we're focusing on a garage, but really the issue is the addition. And in the normal process of things, what would have happened is somebody would have wanted to put on an addition, and then it would have come in front of us and said, okay, if we do the addition, they have to increase the garage, and we'd be talking about the addition first. So I look at this and I go, okay, if this had come in front of me, first of all, would I have approved the addition? And I look at it from that perspective and say I can be persuaded to approve the addition. It's still low on the floor area ratio. It's still got great landscape coverage. So in terms of the addition to the building, I'm comfortable that I could have found the findings to be able to have approved it. It would have just added to housing stock. It wouldn't have impacted neighbors. It increases the idea that the home will be more usable longer. You know, you created a master suite instead of a couple small bedrooms. You made a 2-bedroom house 3-bedroom. So there's a lot of things there that I go, okay, if that addition didn't exist, I would have found a path to do it. So then the next step is, now that I'm comfortable that the addition's okay, what else would I have reasonably, knowing that that triggers the garage, what else would I have reasonably looked at? And I can't believe, well, let's put it this way. It's my opinion that requiring a 2-car garage and understanding all the machinations that would have gone on to fit that on the lot in terms of floor area ratio, landscaping, and everything else, I think that fundamentally flies in the face of the objectives of the ordinance. And just to rephrase it, to me, the ordinance is to create a property that doesn't bother anyone else, that in and of itself has landscaping and works as it relates to the other properties. And even though it's not a perfect situation, I would have been, and I am comfortable in keeping the garage the way it is, just so we don't have to go through a bunch of machinations and push lot coverage and work through possible variances and ruin landscaping and do all that. It's not an ideal situation, but again, just knowing from the path that I would have taken, I think that I would be able to approve the variance appeal. I do have some problems with the conditions, however. Design Review Board approval or exemption prior to obtaining a building permit. The guy's got a building permit. How do we do this?
Well, first of all, he's trying to legalize it, so he actually needs to obtain the stamp approval from the zoning department. When he comes to the counter, in this case,
and
it'll be...
you may want to listen to this, because you'll be very surprised by what you'll have to do.
So he officially does not have an actual, or has not secured an actual building permit. If it requires a building permit, it requires some sort of design review, whether it goes to the board or it obtains a design review exemption approval. Because it's under a certain amount of square footage, being in the multifamily zone, I don't know if it's either 500 or 700 square feet, so I'll have to look that up. But in any case, it's still way under, and it's at the rear, then that's a possible exemption requirement under the code. So that is a possibility. I'm not saying that we're guaranteeing that, but it is possible. Once we review it from a design standpoint, we'll show it to our design studio. Well, obviously, as long as they're in keeping with the code, which they are, so we've addressed that item. Now it's a matter of whether or not the aesthetics is compatible with the existing house. And that will be, if it's exempt, it will be taken care of over the counter, so it doesn't actually have to go before the design review board. So it's obviously a way of expediting smaller, in this case, more minor additions or aesthetic improvements to a property. Or aesthetic changes, rather, depending on how you look at it.
All right, the second condition says address the recommendations and conditions mentioned in the tree permit. Again, that says to tear down, not to tear down, but to remove the tree.
Correct. That is a recommendation, so the way it is, at least the way I viewed it, it sounds like it's not mandatory. However, they are required, or they would need to plant a new oak tree at the front, which I believe they've done. Or not an oak tree, but there's some sort of street tree they've already done. But the recommendation is to plant another oak tree because it's nice to have some sort of presence of a nice tree, or in this case with a nice canopy, and especially because they are somewhat modifying the existing ecosystem at the rear of the lot. So it would be something that would enhance the property. Whether or not they do it, again, it's not mandatory, it's a recommendation.
Well, actually, I don't see a could or anything like that. It says remove and replace. So, to me, I think we need to look at that condition. We need to emphasize that condition to the appellant and say, that's what this condition says, that they need to, and I don't know if we can order the arborist to look at it again, but they need to revisit this with the arborist.
He would be required, prior to obtaining some sort of design review approval, he would be required to obtain a permit, or in this case, an approval stamp, and we need to see it from the arborist. Typically, it's Anne Marie Sheets, who's located in the Permit Services Department. She typically reviews them, and again, we see her stamp. We can meet with her in a, if need be, in a private meeting. That's acceptable as well.
Okay, so what we could conceivably do is, just in terms of clarifying that language, it's address the recommendations or conditions, and then revisit these conditions with the arborist during the approval process. Because what you're saying is the arborist will look at it.
Yes, they would need to secure some sort of approval
And
from
the appellant just
arborist.
needs to realize that he needs to sell the arborist or that tree's coming down.
Correct, and also, if the tree is determined that it must come down, I don't know what kind of impact it would have on the existing garage, so that would need to be looked at as well from a design standpoint.
Okay.
And structural.
Okay, and by the way, I reopened the public hearing to get your input, so now I'm going to reclose it. Related to those conditions, where we talked about the arborist, something else popped up. I guess it goes just in terms of my deliberations. One of the things we're always worried about is precedents. And again, we've heard from the planning director that there's been conversation with the different community input organizations, the zoning advisory board, that's what I was looking for, where they've kind of looked at that, our old housing stock and, what can they do and, how should they handle it. And my point on this is, and whether it establishes precedent or not, but on this specific property, with this specific case, in this 1650 zone, given the setbacks and the constraints on the site as it relates to setbacks, and the use of the garage, and where the house is positioned on the site, and the fact that it falls well under the FAR, that to me, the way to avoid precedent is I'm looking at it in all those things, especially in terms of lot coverage and FAR. So, I don't want this kind of action to start triggering an onslaught of 50 by 100, square foot additions coming in front of us. If they do, they're still going to have some hurdles to overcome. Any other input? Any other observations from the commissioners? Okay, I see none. I would ask that that someone present a motion, and I would ask that they consider modifying the number 2 condition to at least recognize that the arborist has a further approval process.
I'll give it a try. Because of the 3 conditions that's there, the second condition, I kind of would adjust the recommendations and/or conditions mentioned in the tree permitting planning standards. But prior to that, the arborist to revisit the site, to review the conditions to leave the tree intact.
As to whether the tree should be left intact?
Right.
Okay. And otherwise, you should probably reference the findings in it, the findings themselves, if you would, Mr. Lee.
Okay, so that's the part that I guess I need to. Mr. Torgerson was so good with those things.
Well, you can obviously just reference what staff's prepared, if you're comfortable with those.
Well, I'll give it a try, and I need a little guidance here.
And you're right. We sadly miss Mr. Torgerson.
Yes, we do. This is when we mislead the most. So do you want me to read this through and then start doing the ABCDs, or?
Yeah, unless staff has any, I thought we had a motion prepared.
But, yeah,
It's
yeah.
right.
yeah,
I think it's right here.
Yeah.
But, well, no, but
But yeah, a lot of
normally
blanks, yeah.
they would have had a little more.
Right. Wording in there.
Mr. Chair, it looks like there was a draft prepared, or not a draft, but a template, I guess, prepared that's part of the packet.
Yeah, the
Findings, but,
with the blanks, right?
right, and actually those are CP findings, not variance findings. So
Okay.
if you want to take a
Continue
break and then
for
staff can put them together quickly, or to continue have the hearing closed and continue for 2 weeks and have staff make
What's your thought, Mr. Lee?
Well, I don't think you need to continue this. I think they can develop
Then-
language pretty fast.
Then let's work through it. Very good.
Right.
All right.
Do you want to work through it, or do you want to
Well, maybe take a short break and then, give you a little
break?
yeah.
Or you can also, I don't know, it's up to the chair and the commission, but whether to start the next item and then have staff work on the findings. And
So continue this until the next item's.
I'm just saying.
No, I like the idea of it, but Ms. Toledo, are you part of the next hearing?
No, I'm not, but what I just wanted to comment on, that some of the findings were actually somewhat incorporated into the report, which can assist you as you prepare the findings. For example, in the recommendations section of the actual report and the report that was submitted to the zoning hearing officer, it's point by point, for example, how it's justified and how the strict application of the ordinance
I think you can work through that.
would result in practical difficulties.
Thank you for pointing us to that area. Okay, that's just a bad motion.
Determine the public okay.
Oh, here, these are really what you need to work off of. That motion is for a long type of hearing.
What is that?
Oh, this is just one that's laying around here.
Oh, okay.
Certainly look at that.
Nice.
That's my sheet. No.
Okay.
No.
Oh, here, I have mine right here.
Oh, there you go.
Thanks.
I was joking about larger.
Okay.
Mr. Garcia, would it be possible, and perhaps this works in terms of just streamlining the, let's just call it the legal process here. Would it be possible that if Mr. Lee reads the recommendations and agrees with what staff made for the recommendations, he can simply make the motion to approve the variance request as noted in the recommendations prepared by staff?
Yeah, I think as long as we state just what the findings are in each one, and then say as noted on page, page 3 of the report, or page 3 of the report to the zoning administrator.
Okay, so he's...
Page 5.
It happens to be 5.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Mr. Foy, you wanted to say something?
Well, I was just looking at the report, the original report to the zoning administrator. And page 3 of that report, just above the recommendations, those last 2 paragraphs incorporate the 4 findings. I think that's what Ms. Toledo was referring to. So you could...
It's also repeated in the recommendation section for report. Yeah.
Okay. Here, thanks.
I'm sorry, you're still looking at me a little quizzically.
I'm just listening to...
I think that if Commissioner Lee were to make the motion and then go through each finding saying as noted on page 5 of the staff report, then what will happen is that will be incorporated into the findings that are confirmed by Ms. Toledo.
So by referencing back to the recommendations, now then, shouldn't there be actual wording that pertains to each findings at some later date that, were in that finished form? If I make the reference to the recommendations here,
Yeah, what will happen if we do it here tonight is that then staff will then will take the findings and incorporate the language from the staff report. If you make that as part of your motion,
Sure.
that I make the finding that there was unnecessary hardships as noted on paragraph 1 of page 5 of the staff report.
Here we go.
Paragraph 1 of the recommendation on page 5
Here
of
we
the
go.
staff report.
You might, Mr. Lee, you might.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Finding 1 kind of fits there, finding 2 fits here, finding 3, and finding
What he's doing now?
Okay.
Can't find that report.
I move that upon review and consideration of all materials and exhibits of current record relative to variance case number PVAR 2009-027, located at 1326 Barrington Way, and after having conducted an appeal hearing on said matter, that the Commission hereby reverses the zoning of the hearing officer's decision and approves said variance case number PVAR 2009-027 based on the following findings pursuant to Title 30, Chapter 30.43.030, Glendale Municipal Code.
You can't use those. You can use those. Okay.
Yeah,
The first finding that the strict application of the ordinance would result in practical difficulties or unnecessary hardship inconsistent with the general purpose and intent of the ordinance, and the finding could be found on the page 5 of the recommendation. The location of the existing mature trees in the rear yard.
Number 1.
The variance is justified on the basis that the strict application of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship in that the location of the oak tree precludes expansion of the garage. To require 20-foot width for the garage by denying the request variance would require removal of the oak tree, which would be inconsistent with the preserving native plant life and the associated ecosystem that is supports on site. Okay. The second finding that there are exceptional circumstances or conditions applicable to the property involved or to the intended use or development of the property that do not apply generally to other property in the same zone or neighborhood.
It starts with the location.
The location of the existing mature trees in the rear yard, that is, the oak and Brazilian pepper trees, are a unique condition applicable to the property. As previously indicated, different options were explored in order to make the parking situation code compliant. However, each option resulted in additional code issues which undermines the existing site conditions. Legalizing the existing 330 square foot house addition will be in keeping with and will not disturb the character of the existing residence. The third finding that the granting of the variance will not materially detrimental to the public welfare or injuries to the property or improvements in such a zone or neighborhood in which the property is located. The third finding in the recommendations of the proposal will not be detrimental to public welfare since the addition to the existing house is similar to the existing uses in the community. The one-story addition will be located at the rear of the house and will not create additional zoning code violations as it relates to the height, setbacks, floor area ratio, lot coverage, or landscaping. And the last finding is that the granting of the variance will not be contrary to the objectives of the ordinance. Granting of the variance will not be contrary to the objective of the ordinance. Legalizing the house addition while not providing two covered and enclosed parking spaces would allow the preservation of an existing on-site oak tree and open space.
And then you previously had mentioned the conditions.
Yes, 3 conditions that, with the modification of the second condition, with the arborist visiting the site.
All right, we have a motion seeking support.
Second.
Motion and support. Please call roll.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Sheets,
No.
Commissioner Yasayan,
Aye.
and Chair Kane.
Aye. On a vote of 3-1, variance case 2009-027 has been approved with conditions. Under the provisions of Chapter 2.88 of the Glendale Municipal Code, any person affected by the decision of the Commission has the right to appeal said determination to the City Council if it is believed that the decision is in error or that procedural errors have occurred, or if there's substantial new evidence which could not have been reasonably presented at the hearing. Any appeal must be filed within 15 days following the actual date of such action. Information regarding appeals and appeal forms are provided upon request and must be filed in the Permit Services Center, 633 East Broadway, Room 101, together with the required filing fee of $650 for such an appeal. Their telephone number is 818-548-3200. So that closes this matter, and we will move down the agenda as soon as I find the agenda. Thank you very much. To new business, and it's a tentative parcel map number GLN 1625. The location is 2246 through 2248 Raphael Terrace, APN 5654-002-018. The applicant/property owner is Sam and Ann Hyde Danielian. The description is a request to subdivide one 3.13-acre site into two parcels within the R1R restricted residential zone, floor area ratio District 2. The recommendation is a motion that the Planning Commission deny the tentative parcel map number GLN 1625. Staff is represented by Mr. Hamilton. Please give us the overview, sir.
Chairman, members of the Commission, the proposal is to subdivide this 3.13-acre site into two lots for single-family development purposes. The parcel map is shown here, the preliminary grading plan here, house plans, tentative or conceptual house plans are here, and then we've got a couple of aerial photographs here, and in a moment, I'll show you we've got the same sort of photographs on here for the benefit of the public. The neighborhood is primarily single family, but just to the south of the site, there's a large condominium project, and to the east is the freeway, the 2 freeway. The project is generally the proposed project is generally consistent with the elements of the general plan. However, in terms of the housing element, it is contrary to policy 6.5 in that it is proposed to be developed on a secondary ridge line, and it is inconsistent with two goals of the open space and conservation element. Goal 2 calls for protection of sensitive open space areas, including ridge lines, and Goal 5 calls for preserving prominent ridge lines and slopes in order to protect Glendale's visual resources. The applicant also owns this property to the east of the development site, and that is going to be preserved as open space. That would be preserved as open space. This map here, which is a little bit hidden from view from you over there at the site, shows the green area is the secondary ridgeline area, in this area, and you'll note that it encompasses virtually the entire site, except for a small corner right here, basically. The site has been previously graded at some point in the past. It's not clear when. We're up at the top here, and that is this graded pad is the site proposed for the homes. There have been several development proposals for the site in the past. It has been approved. It has been denied at least twice by the Planning Commission and once by the City Council. But then it has been approved twice also, and both those maps have expired. Most recently, the map expired in 2007. This application was submitted September 18th, 2008, and it has taken a long time to get to this stage because we've been working with fire department and the city engineer's office and the engineer to try to resolve the many issues that affect the site. The proposed lot sizes comply with the average lot size of 30,000 square feet for R1R lots that have the slope greater than 30%. The average slope on the site is about 51 to 53%. They're proposed to widen Rafael Terrace in front of their property to a width of 40 feet, and then also incorporate a hammerhead turnaround shown a little bit more clearly on the grading plans that will both be on and off the development, their own property. There's already a dedication been given by the neighboring property owner for some of that turnaround. That current dedication is not reflective of the final design here, so that would have to be altered if this was approved. This is recommended by the fire department, but it is not a requirement of the subdivision ordinance. In order to create the hammerhead turnaround and the driveway, there would have to be a deep cut through the pronounced ridge line that rises abruptly above Rafael Terrace. So the property rises quickly up above Rafael Terrace, 15 feet or so, to this flat pad, and they're proposing to cut through that ridge, that berm, that bank, to put in the hammerhead and then the driveway out along the pad. Compared to the last project, the grading quantity has increased because the size of the turnaround has increased, because the slopes within the graded area have been laid back a little bit, and the retaining wall heights are lower, so the grading quantity has gone up from 4,360 to 6,580 cubic yards in the current proposal. The average size of the lots in the neighborhood exceeds, the average size of this project exceeds the average of the neighborhood, so it is consistent with that. Both lots would be considered flag lots. The width of the flags are consistent with the municipal code. There are other flag properties also in the neighborhood, including the neighboring property just to the north, a large property to the south that has a long flag off of Alpha Road, and then there are some other flag properties a little bit further away. So there are other flag lots in the neighborhood. The density of the proposed subdivision is below the maximum permitted, so it's consistent with the land use element density standards. The sort of primary issue or concern by staff at this point is simply the development of the site within a secondary ridgeline and conforming to or fulfilling or meeting all the various criterion standards and the problems with the open space and conservation and housing elements. There are criteria that if the Planning Commission wished to approve this would have to be met by the project. Those criteria include manufactured slopes limited to a steepness of 1.5 to 1 and a maximum height of 25 feet. Retaining walls limited to a maximum height of 5 feet and no more than 2 successive walls. Crib walls or successive crib walls limited to a maximum height of 15 feet. Structures limited to a maximum of 15 feet or 1 story in height. Grading and structures located as far away from the crest of the secondary ridge as possible. Grading and structures to be consistent with the intent and purpose of the hillside design guidelines, and the naturalizing landscape palette being used for the property. The problem in this case is that although it conforms to several of these criteria, there are at least three that staff believes it is not consistent with. The grading plan shows 1-to-1 cut slopes along this portion of the development site. Now this is actually off the property, but it's within the street right-of-way. This is again another area off the property that would have to be graded in order to put this development in. And the 1-to-1 cut slopes are not consistent with the criteria in the secondary ridgeline. However, this grading plan has been reviewed and found acceptable by the city engineer's office. It is possible that this representation by the applicant's engineer, and he can speak to this may actually represent existing condition because the slope along the street here is along this portion of Rafael Terrace is very steep. It might actually it is approaching 1-to-1 now. So it's Hike Martirosian can speak to that as about how much grading would actually have to occur in that location off the property. The other problem is that they're showing 2-story house plans when only 1 story is allowed. Now, only 1 story is shown above the dirt level, but we define stories and grades in relation to the curb average top of curb in front of the property. And because this driveway rises so steeply from the average top of curb, even the subterranean garage is considered a story for purposes of the code, and so they have a 2-story house when only 1 story is allowed. The grading is all entirely located within the secondary ridgeline area, which is contrary to criteria 5. It's worth pointing out there is no real feasible alternative to that, though, because of how steeply the property slopes away from the pad at the top. The model, there is a model that has been submitted by the applicant and his engineer. I'm not sure where you'd like me to set this, maybe here, or you could pass it around, it's small enough. It generally represents the project. You can see Rafael Terrace coming up here, the cut through the berm, and then the driveway cutting through the berm and then providing access to the 2 houses. There are some details where the model doesn't quite reflect the reality as shown on the plans. Anyway, the house plans come quite a bit closer to the edge than on the drawings than on the model. So I'm trying to talk loud. The house plan, the model house location does not really jibe with the conceptual plans. They should come a little closer. The retaining walls within the street right-of-way, but the engineer's office has said there should not be any retaining walls within the right-of-way. This should be laid back to that 1-to-1 slope. So if this was approved, there might have to be some changes to both the conceptual plan and perhaps the grading plan. Or you might want to continue until a corrected model is presented and provided. For benefit of the public, the aerial photograph shown on the screen now, which should be visible on TV, shows an overhead view of the site with the property highlighted in yellow, condominiums to the south, and Rafael Terrace and El Arbolita above, and the single-family homes along that up above, and then the freeway off to the east to the right side of the image. The key question in staff's mind in evaluating this project is whether the subdivision should be approved in order to enable reasonable development of the site. The off-street dedication would not be required if only a single house was proposed. Substantially less grading would be needed. You wouldn't have to extend the driveway as far. You wouldn't have to put in the hammerhead, so you could do less grading in that area. The secondary ridgeline could be kept somewhat more intact, and there would be less disruption to the neighborhood. One of the problems staff has had in processing this and why it's taken so long is the difficulty of meeting the various competing standards for grading, secondary ridgeline protection, and subdivision standards. In particular, providing driveway access to the property requires that deep cut through the ridge at the north side of the property. Due to the size of the cut, the steepness of the slope, and the proximity to the street, the solutions proposed by the applicant to date have either required retaining walls taller than are allowed in the secondary ridgeline criteria and by the standards contained in the zoning ordinance, or, in the present case, cut slopes of 1-to-1 within the street right-of-way. I should point out that the last time the project was approved, they had retaining walls taller than allowed by code, but a condition required that they get a variance for that. Rather than go through those convolutions, the applicant has come up with this scheme to try to avoid that, but again, it runs afoul of the city's strong preference to not have cut slopes of 1-to-1 anywhere in the city anymore. That's just not a consistent grading standard. If the Planning Commission wishes to approve the map, as I stated, the model would probably have to be revised to be more consistent with the grading plan and the conceptual house plans also. Fundamentally, what might have been reasonable in the past is not the same today. The standards of the community and the City Council have evolved. Today, staff is expected to critically evaluate whether development is truly in the best interests of the community. It is, in staff's opinion, hard to see in this case how adding one extra house to this challenging and protected area would provide a benefit to the community that outweighs the presumption against approval in secondary ridgelines. Therefore, it's the recommendation of the Community Planning Department staff that tentative parcel map number GLN 1625 be denied. If, however, the Planning Commission prefers to approve the project, staff would recommend that the item be continued to a date certain sometime in the future to enable staff to prepare necessary findings and conditions and to enable the applicant to make the various corrections that staff believes are necessary in order to have an approvable project. Do you have any questions?
Questions for staff at this moment?
Do we have any idea as far as if this was to be built? That road seems very smart, Raphael Terrace. And is there going to be any closures to that road if this was to be built? And I'm sure that those closures would affect the other two houses on that road. I can't see how this is. All the grading is going to be taking place, and all of that's going to be taking place without any closures happening to that road.
That's a good question. The road is quite narrow. It's not a standard road width. It is being improved by this project a small amount to meet a minimum standard, but it's possible, and the engineer, Mr. Martirosian, can probably better speak to this. It's possible that during construction activities, it may be very congested on that short roadway and make it be difficult for the families that do take access further to the west. I can't speak to whether the road would actually have to be closed or not.
Any other questions for staff at this time? All right, we'll move on. The appellant, or the applicant rather, has, I guess it's appellant, has 15 minutes. Mr. Martirosian. Nice
Good evening, Chairman Kane and Commissioners. My name is Haik Martirosian. My address is 1545 North Verdugo Road, Glendale. I'm a civil engineer associated with this project for at least last 9 years. We have gone through 2 approvals and 1 extension. My track record is pretty good completing all this project, except this one. We got to the point that we're almost a week away from finalizing the track map, the parcel map. We could have. But anyway, this is a new project in front of you. Subject property is consisting of 3.13 acres, 136,000 square feet. Currently vacant, and it's zoned for single families. Site contains 38% average slope, which is kind of contradict with the staff report that calls for 51 to 53. We calculated back then, and nothing has been changed on the slope since last 6-7 years. So we feel comfortable that average slope is still the same. City Hillside Ordinance identified this site as a secondary ridge line. The property was originally graded during the construction of the Glendale Freeway, and there is a graded path almost 20,000 square feet right at the top of the ridge. We are not altering any ridge line or anything. The density of the project is well below the maximum allowable for that size and average slope of that property in R1R zone. The proposed lot size average 30,000 and 105,000, which is well above the lot sizes which are within 500 radius feet of that area. Proposed development meets all the required zoning and planning and engineering requirements, and I will go over them one by one. And I will start with ridgeline requirements. Item number 1, manufactured slopes limited to maximum steepness of 1.5 horizontal to vertical. Our design is called for 2-to-1 slope, which is shallower than what the ridge line is allowing us to do. So we are Our retaining walls are smaller, shorter, and our slopes are shallower. Retaining walls limited to maximum height of 5 feet. Our retaining walls are between 3 to 5 feet. We have nothing over 5 feet high retaining wall. Creep walls or successive creep walls limited to maximum height of combined height of 15 feet. We are allowed to use creep walls up to 15 feet, but that's not applicable. We are not using creep walls. We are using retaining walls, short walls. Structures limited to maximum of 15 feet. Since the topography of the site is so much that we have to cut into the road to create the road, our driveway is going to be access to our property through the hill. So that portion of the houses which are going to sit right at the top of the graded area, it's all 15 feet high. And we just meeting the conditions of requirements of the ridgeline, requirements of the secondary ridgeline. Since we are cutting into the hill, our driveways are hidden. Nobody is going to be, the garages are not going to be visible from both sides. So whoever is going to see the houses from outside, it's all going to be 15 feet. Our plans, our conceptual plans calls between 22 feet high houses, which are, as I said, the 7 or 9 feet of them, it's part of the garage, and the entire level of the house.
I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, you said 22-foot high house?
22 foot high from the finished grade to the top of the ridge. Off of that, it's 9 feet is the garage, which is 7 to 9 feet is garage elevation, and the rest of it is 13 to 15 feet, which is right at the top of the ridge. So number 4 of the secondary ridgeline condition, we already meeting those conditions. Grading and structure must be located far away. This site is already being graded. We have a 20,000 square feet of flat pad, and it's very good feasible site to build a couple of houses there. Naturalized landscape. The entire site is open space. We have 136,000 square feet of property that it's portion of it is going to be maintained as an open space, and the rest of it, which is within those two proposed houses, are going to be landscape. So I don't see we already meeting all these secondary ridgeline requirements. Grading. Even though fire department turnaround is not part of the requirements of the subdivision, we met with the fire department and we agreed to comply with their recommendation. It's not the requirement, it's a recommendation that we provide them a turnaround area. That causes to have more grading than what we had previously done on the site, and we had approval. That counts to almost 1,490 cubic yard of additional grading that we're going to do just to provide that turnaround area. Again, it's not part of the requirements of the subdivision. It's just a recommendation by the fire department that we provide that just to enhance their accessibility. However, with all the respect with the planning staff recommendation, I myself disagree with their recommendation to deny this additional house. Special characteristic that applies to this property with the lot sizes and topography and grading, I think it's suitable to have another lot, another house built on that site. As I said, to have at least one lot, one house built there, we still have to create a driveway cutting through the hill to provide the access to this house. So one more house is not going to add more traffic or whatever congestion to that area. As far as the one-to-one grading that is in part of the city right-of-way, we approached city engineer. Originally, we had designed for 2-to-1 with a 5 feet high retaining wall. the city engineers agreed with us that due to difficulty to maintain the retaining wall along the city property, it's better just keep it as a one-to-one, and they have already reviewed the plan, and they already agreed that one-to-one will work with less grading involved on that site. And besides that, I don't have anything else to add. If you, Commissioner, have any question, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Any questions for the applicant at this time?
Well, do you have anything to say about the closure?
At the closure, because of the size of the road, there is going to be a problem with the neighbors to close the street. But since it's going to be a fast project, just to open that area of that Raphael Terrace, they will take as shortest time to open that area. The most of the grading is going to happen within the property, so it's not going to be that much closure for the neighbors to pass. It's only 2 houses, or maybe, yes, 2 houses after our property that might be affected by closure of short-time closure of that street.
So do you know a length, a time of length? Of that
It would be based on a grading operation. I wouldn't say shouldn't take more than 2 to 3 weeks just to cut that portion.
So the closure would be?
It's not going to be a complete closure.
Yeah.
It's going to be a flag person there to help the neighbors to pass at the time of grading. But it's going to happen anyway, even if it's going to be 1 lot or it's going to be 3 lot and whatever. It's part of that narrowness of that street.
All right. I'm going to have a. Do you have a question? But just in terms of telegraphing, Mr. Danielian, you will be part of this presentation. You have a speaker card, so you have the opportunity to speak, but you need to make sure you park it in this time frame. All right. Mr.
One
Sheets.
question. How much excavation remains? The pads are there. So what remains to be done as far as excavation?
There is a 20,000 square feet flat pad, and it's going to be almost 2,200 just to create that driveway.
And then down by the
Then by the time we get it to the hammerhead and the slope behind the driveway, it will come up to somewhere around 6,500 cubic yards.
And that's all being exported.
Yes, except we have
about 120 fill. Yeah.
for backfilling of the walls.
Oh, I have.
Okay. A couple things. The model, when was that created as it relates to this particular presentation?
This model was created for our last approval, and we didn't want to go forward to complete it as part of this package. Since there was nothing changed physically as part of the design, the only thing is the right-of-way retaining wall was removed, and the fire department recommendation, which was extended. And again, just to emphasize on the fire department recommendation, we just show it to see that we can achieve their recommendation. We can achieve that as part of our grading scheme. There could be another solution to that hammerhead with less grading involved. Providing fire hydrant within the driveway, or the building is going to be fully sprinkled anyway. But again, I just showed the entire portion of fire department recommendation just to emphasize that we can achieve their goals in case.
Because, and I appreciate that this is an older model, because one of the things that kind of concerns me is that right now, under the current design, that house, it falls off immediately. You don't have a flat area off this side of the house. It starts falling right from the corner of the house down.
Right.
So instead of being, so to speak, set back, it's really pronounced.
I understand. I mean, the house is, the model was built a smaller version, so.
And let's see. So you've got 6,500 yards of export.
That's correct.
Okay.
At the maximum.
And would you assume that's going to be a single bottom, it won't be a double bottom haul, right?
Well, we're going to talk to Department of Transportation to see what type of dump truck they will.
I don't know how you'd maneuver with a double bottom. I mean, you're an experienced civil engineer.
It can
do
be
you see this being done?
Smaller. Again, I mean, they can create larger area at the time they open that driveway, start working within the lot. Then
don't think.
Again,
do you honestly think that there's room for dump trucks to come in, a double bottom dump truck to come in and spin around? Because where I'm getting from on that is you now have at least 650 dump trips if you're using a single truck, at least. And then the question is, how do they stage? Where do you do it? It's going to be an ugly construction period.
well, it's again, it's something that we can work with the Department of Transportation using the flag person, using staging area within our site and outside of Rafael Terrace on Wider Street. And as I said, using flag person to maneuver the trucks.
Okay, so we have and some of this might relate to Mr. Danielian. I understand you're civil, as opposed to the architect. But, so we've got a 15-foot overall height. You've got basically 11 feet to the eaves. Is that the 11 feet to the eaves, does that mean 11-foot walls, or does that mean 10-foot walls? I mean, what's the actual floor-to-ceiling height? Do you happen to know, Mr. Danielian?
I'm not an architect, no.
Okay. All right. For the record, he said no. I only say that because you're not on the microphone. Because one of the things I'm looking at is the idea of one home versus two homes, the square footage of the home as it relates to location on the site, the height of the house. Those are the things I'm just sort of reflecting on.
Well, we have, I believe, one of the houses has shown some elevation of 11 feet to the eaves, so.
Right, and that's just not, I mean, it looks like it's on slab. It looks to me like it's at least 10-foot walls, which those are rather tall for residential, depending on what part of the house it is. All right, enough pontificating on that. Any other questions for the speaker? I'm sorry, Mr. Sheets.
Yeah, just, there was some, I was confused, there was some mention about the retaining walls being, at one point you had mentioned that they were within 3 to 5 feet, but then there were some areas where they would be greater than 5 feet. Is that true?
No. The grading, the retaining walls along this project is not going to be higher than 5 feet.
Okay.
Actually, we have from 3 feet to 5 feet. There is no retaining wall higher than 5 feet.
Okay, and then on the item about crib walls, you said there were no...
There is no crib wall, no.
And those, you said, but you stated that they would be, you would use retaining walls.
Right, I mean, crib wall is allowed to use based on the secondary regional requirements, but we are not using it. We're just going with the regular retaining walls, 5 feet high maximum.
Okay, thank you.
And you reviewed this with engineering.
Yes.
Are there any requirements for like freeboard on the retaining wall?
Freeboard, usually it does not count as height of the retaining wall by city grading ordinance. This grading plan was already approved by city engineer based on the last approval.
Is that true, planning staff? Is that a retaining wall at 5 feet, and then they can, if engineering requires 3 feet of freeboard, then it's an 8-foot retaining wall?
No.
No. Okay, so who's wrong here? Because I understand they've looked at it, and you're testifying 5-foot walls. That's all to code.
That's correct.
But if the engineer requires, let's say, 2 feet of freeboard, now you have a 7-foot retaining wall, which is, everybody hears 5 feet, and they think it's 5 feet, not 5 feet plus whatever.
That's on same project that we have approval. We had our retaining wall set at 5 feet with a 12 inches of freeboard. That 12 inch of freeboard, they did not count it as a retaining.
And
So-
maybe we should define freeboard, by the way. There's always a little bit of height from behind a retaining wall to allow for dirt to fall against it or whatever. So that area where the retaining wall sticks above the ground is called the freeboard, in effect,
correct.
right?
That's correct.
I'm just in case other people
That's
are confused by terminology.
Mr. Kane, Chairman, typically staff includes freeboard in the allowable height of the wall. So if the wall's allowed to be 5 feet, that would include any freeboard that would be necessary for the wall, typically.
Then we probably have
Now,
an issue.
that's when we're talking about retaining walls in the front setback or within setback property lines. If it's interior, if it's interior to the property and not within the setback area, we don't typically care about the height unless it's behind the house, when it can be up a maximum of 15 feet.
No, we do care. It's
Or
5
if
feet.
it's in-
On most of the property, it's 5 feet. It can be 15 feet behind the house. There's like
15 feet behind the house.
a height limit of 3 feet, 5 feet, 8 feet, 15 feet, just depending on where it is. 7 feet, 18 inches above existing ground level. All those are retaining wall standards.
That's why staff can't keep it straight in our own minds.
Just depends on where they are.
So, and where I'm going with this is we have a preliminary grading plan that engineering has looked at and approved. How well did city staff get into, planning staff get into this as far as the retaining walls, what's shown? Is it truly meeting the 5-foot limit or not?
Well, it's shown in meeting the 5-foot limit, but we didn't. It's not shown. It's not indicated on the plans. There's not enough detail to show whether or not there's any freeboard included in that. I'd have to go back to the engineer to find out about whether there's freeboard included within that 5 feet or freeboard would be in excess of the 5 feet.
If you look at the grading plan that I drew closely, it will show the top of the walls. That shows where the top of the wall is. Now, the freeboard is below that, 6 inches or 12 inches. If I have the top of the wall elevation, that clearly shows that's the height of the wall that we have. So, including the freeboard, I can say it's a 5 feet. I cannot exceed more than 5 feet.
Okay, because the way you were starting to,
Right.
is the way I understood you to start testifying is it's 5 feet plus 2 feet, and
Right, but in my past experience with the city, we had designed retaining walls that had a freeboard that was not part of the retaining walls. It did not count as a part of the retaining wall, especially for those 15 feet high walls. Based on the soil engineer recommendation, we added foot or 2 feet of freeboard. Did not count as part of the retaining wall.
okay, and I'm hearing a schism there in terms of planning staff and that.
Okay, that's-
I appreciate you sharing that,
Sure.
but it's an interesting thing. But again, so what you're testifying here is that on this preliminary grading plan, there is no retaining wall where top of wall to top of finished surface is greater than 5 feet?
That's correct.
And I know I have the advantage here of looking at the plan, and you're sitting here, but section AA on C2, and again, this is a little diagrammatic, but you've referenced a top of wall of 221. It looks taller than in that in plan. Not much, but it might be 222.
Okay, I mean, this is just a schematic drawing, but as I said, the grading plan was approved
You see
previously.
how, if you look at scale, it just seems a little off.
Grading plan was previously approved by the city engineer. This one, they have reviewed it, but hasn't been through the plan check.
Yeah.
So it will be part of the plan check if the project get approval, and we can make it as a condition that we stay within 5 feet. I don't have any problem with that.
Typically, this level of detail you're talking about now would occur not at parcel map stage. It would occur at design review stage or even at plan check stage. And it's the applicant's responsibility to conform to code if it proceeds that far.
But when engineering reviews something like this, are they looking at it from a technical perspective? They're just making sure if walls strengths, locations, or are they looking at it kind of as the way it falls into the planning and setbacks and that type of stuff as well?
No, the different departments look at it in different ways. The engineering department is looking at it is it in conformance to their engineering standards? Is it in conformance to the grading standards under their codes? We're looking at these things. Is it in conformance with the zoning ordinance? Is it in conformance with our hillside design guidelines? So different sets of eyes, different criteria.
All right. Did you want to say anything at this time, Mr. Danielian?
I know it's very late. I'm going to try to keep it very short. I'm Sam Danielian, and my address is 557 West Glen Oaks in Glendale, and I appreciate your time. And I'm going to just bring a few things that everybody will have just the right idea of what's going on here. Okay. Now, this project was approved for 3 houses, but there was some problem, and the time expired, and we start with again new application, and we could have started with 3, but then we discussed with staff department and the planning department, and just accommodating them where we start with 2. And this 2 was approved by the Planning Commission. It was approved by the engineering. It was approved by the Design Review Board. And we were ready. And then we had a complete package signed by the city engineers. And all these questions that you were asking to my engineer, the grading, and other things, it was already taken care of by the engineering department. And we were ready for to record this parcel map. And it was stamped by city engineering department, planning department, and water and power, and everybody signed. And I went to pull the permit, and I got the permit in my hand, and then Mr. Krause and Mr. Hamilton came to the building department. They said, well, we made a mistake. You're not going to pull the permit and this and that. So anyway, to make it short, we arranged a meeting with Mr. Garcia, the city attorney assistant, and planning staff. We went through everything. We said, okay, we don't want to make a big issue. So just they recommended to apply, and we will get approval instantly because there is no changes to the project. And at this time, there is no change to the project. So we had approval from Planning Commission, Planning Department, and we just resubmit the application. That's all we're doing. And all the gradings and engineering and technical stuff, it was approved by the engineering department. It was approved by the Design Review Board. So we had no question about that. And I do still get letter from engineering department that they're saying that when I'm going to start my grading and the drainage, because they still know that the project has been approved and I have a permit. So this is, I'm just giving you that giving you all this information so you will know that the project doesn't have any problem for the design-wise or any problem for the architectural-wise. And this is the letter I just got September 24 from City of Engineering Division. It's saying that our records indicate that permit to perform grading work on the above site address is still active. So this says that the project was approved by all the departments. And I could have built 3 houses on this one, which I did not do it. I just tried to accommodate the planning department and just decided to go with 2. And if you want me to build 1 house, it's going to be more than 10,000 square feet mansion, which is not going to fit with the neighborhood. The neighbors are very excited, and they're very happy about this project. As a matter of fact, they asking me to build 3 houses, not 2 houses. And we've been working on this project over 20 years. And the neighbors already know everything, and they're very happy and satisfied. And there is no single complaint from any neighbor or any community in that respect. Okay. So if you have any question, I will answer to you. If not, I will just strongly request for the approval, because I have no other choice. The other choice is just to build 3 houses and just make the small houses and to build 3 houses. Because whether it's a 3 house, 2 house, 1 house, and whether you do some remodeling onto existing houses, Mr. Esayan, that you were asking whether the road is going to be closed or not, it's going to happen. Even if you do nothing about this project and the existing house owners, they do some addition or whatever, yeah, the street is narrow. So it's going to require some distraction.
You had a question for the speaker?
Yeah, you mentioned you have neighbors supporting the project. Do you have any letters in support of it, or any proof of their support, and what neighbors are they?
Well, I have from previous approval that the neighbors already tired about this project, that we're going back and forth the last 15 years, 20 years. So everybody's supporting this project. Otherwise, you will see a neighbor here coming and complaining about the project.
Well, were the neighbor, can I ask staff a question?
Mm-hmm.
Were the neighbors notified about this hearing today?
Yes, the neighbors are notified. Staff has not received any comments or either in support or opposition on this project.
And how are they notified? By mail?
By mail. To all the property owners of record within 500 feet.
Right, but this, I'm sorry, not to go, please continue.
How long ago were they notified about this hearing?
10 to 12 days ago.
Okay.
And I've just referenced the map to just see how many property owners were involved, so
Yeah.
I was curious about that myself.
Yeah, okay.
So just finalize, Mr. Kane, members of commission. You see a project in front of you which was approved by the planning department and planning commission and design review board. And if you have any other questions, just I'm here and the engineer here, we can go ahead and answer it. Yeah. I don't see any reason to continue this or just to drag it. I don't see any reason. This is just keep dragging and dragging. It's been already 20 years. Anyways, it's going to be built. So whether it's 2 or 3, someday it's going to be built. And since we already got all the departments' approval, why are we dragging this project? I don't understand. So I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward that you approve this project so we can finalize and the neighbors will have a peace of mind too. Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker? Not at this time. Thank you very much, sir. All right, I do not have any other speaker cards. I'd like to hear from staff in terms of anything that they've heard from the appellant or the applicant, rather. And then I would also like to see if the commission have further questions for staff.
I haven't heard anything that I would object to necessarily. Mr. Martirosyan indicated that the slopes on the property are 2-to-1. Generally, they are. Within the project site, they're 2-to-1. The issue, as I've pointed out, is this 1-to-1 slope that's off the site within the public right-of-way. Again, that the city engineer has decided that that's preferable to a 2-to-1 that might also include a retaining wall. I didn't hear anything else that the height of the house. I wanted to point out that what we're talking about is from the base of the garage, from the floor of the garage to the peak of the roof, is shown in the conceptual plans as 22 feet, and also planning department considers it 2 stories. It's that combination, 2 stories, more than 15 feet, that is inconsistent with the secondary ridgeline criteria. The garage is essentially buried into the hillside, but for purposes of our code, the garage is still above grade and is considered a story because it's more than 3 feet above the average top of curb. It would be more than 3 feet above the average top of curb at the street frontage. So even though it's in the hill, it's still considered a story for purposes of municipal code. And it's in that sense, it's inconsistent with the criteria. These are only conceptual plans. This is just an attempt to prove that the project can be feasibly developed. This is not necessarily the same building plans that would end up going to design review board.
Mr. Hargani?
Yes, I wanted to add something from the standpoint of the past practices that we actually have learned from and we would not repeat today. One of those that has been reflected in this particular case was a condition that would be contingent upon getting a variance by another body than the Planning Commission. In this case, there was a variance. Without that variance, the condition would not be met. If today the Planning Commission wanted to approve such a process, we would recommend against it, because a variance is a discretionary approval process, and the Planning Commission's approval itself would send a message that would presume that the variance was approvable. In this case, and we all understand that variances cannot be presumed to be approved. So that was a bad practice in the past that we have stopped, and we would not recommend it today.
I would like to add to, we've been having a debate internally about whether the Planning Commission can grant exceptions to the secondary ridgeline criteria. The Planning Commission has the authority to grant exceptions to various subdivision standards. And that was referenced during as part of the last parcel map application, but we don't believe it's appropriate to grant exceptions to the secondary ridgeline standards because they're sort of a fundamental criteria that if you develop in the secondary ridgeline, you have to meet these criteria. Well, how can you grant an exception from those criteria if that's a fundamental standard that you have to develop in order to get into that secondary ridgeline in the first place? So we would not recommend that you consider granting exceptions to those secondary ridgeline criteria. Without that, you have three fundamental contradictions to those criteria.
Refresh my memory. Parcel maps are 6 years in duration?
Parcel maps are 3 years by default originally, and then the state granted
It's 5 now.
5 now by default.
Provisions,
No,
yes.
no. You can, the initial, if approved, the initial tentative parcel map period is 3 years. The state in the past, they've done this 4 times, extended the life of tentative maps. A few years ago, they did it twice. They did it for 1 year last year, and they just did it again this year for an additional 2 years.
I'm just wondering how it went from the last time it was approved was 2001 and expired in 07.
Well, that was partly why. Yeah.
Yeah, part of it might have been the state extensions.
Yes.
You can also get
That's what I was just clarifying.
You can also get up to a 3-year extension under local law. So you get 3 years to start with. It can apply to you for a 3-year extension, soon to be 6 years if your recommendation is approved or introduced and then voted on by council in the next 2 weeks, consistent with state law. Plus whatever the state occasionally gives based on bad economic times, like they just granted 2 extra years. So we had some of these tentative tracts and parcel maps drag on for 8 or 9 years in the past. That's unusual, but it has happened.
Again, because I'm just wondering when it was extended from its original 3 years. So
it would have been before they would have had to have applied for the extension prior to the initial 3-year period being expired.
It's just in our packet. It doesn't indicate.
Jeff
when it
has
was
the history, I think.
I have the history. I did the staff report in 2005 for the time extension.
Oh, all right.
The parcel map was approved in 2001 with a 3-year time limit. The Subdivision Map Act, the State Subdivision Map Act allows for up to a 5-year extension. The city received a request for an extension prior to the expiration date, and at that time, they asked for a 3-year extension, and because it was going to expire in 2004, they added 3 years to it at their request to 2007. So from 2001 to 2007, 3 years plus 3 years, they were allowed up to, they could have asked for up to 5 years, they only asked for 3, they got 3. Which took them to 2007, and then it expired in 2007.
All right, so 93, the secondary ridgeline rules went into effect, correct?
Yes.
So 93, there's been several actions on the site since then, and each time they've come in front of us, Planning Commission, or not Planning, well, Planning Commission and planning staff said it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, and times do change. But as recently as 3 years ago, roughly, planning staff said it was still okay. Is that about right?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it that way. The first time it came up, Planning Commission turned it down, and it died. The second time it came up, Planning Commission turned it down. It was appealed to City Council. City Council sent it back to Planning Commission. Ultimately, Planning Commission approved it. So I wouldn't say that Planning Commission and planning staff necessarily have been recommending approval or have been approving this. There has been a convoluted process involved here, with obviously some recommendations or at least some belief that this should be turned down in the past. Ultimately, the City Council, the Planning Commission has chosen to approve this at least twice in the past, but the applicant, for whatever reason, has let both of those maps expire and has lost all the rights that he was entitled to as a result of those maps, pertaining to those maps. So when they asked for the time extension, we did recommend approval of the time extension back in 2005. We also recommended approval of the map back in 2001 the last time it came up also.
How, and I'm not sure if anyone here can address it, how can a grading permit be considered to have been left open and, well, still left open after all this time?
I wish the city engineer was here to respond to that.
I didn't know that anyone at this
That's
table.
their purview.
Right. Because a building permit, it's like 6 months without action, right?
I think so.
Well, then I would also add, too, that since this map was approved prior, there's been changes in the grading ordinance also, which may have another bearing on this, too, because they've reduced the slope that would be allowable. That was quite a large change that occurred about 3 years ago.
I'm just, again, it's not necessarily for us, but somebody in engineering, it would be interesting to hear how a permit can be left open that long. Because it's certainly atypical as it relates to a building.
Was the map that was approved before, was it the same type of design plan? Or what was it?
It was virtually identical to this. There's a different configuration of the hammerhead. In this case, the hammerhead sort of extends towards the street and then to the west onto the neighboring property. In the previous version, the hammerhead design sort of flipped over and turned south onto the neighboring property and west onto it. If you look at the screen, you can see the previous hammerhead design. So it's somewhat different. The fire department prefers the current configuration to that one. Other than that, there's a slight change in the angle of the driveway. We've gone to the 1-to-1 slopes in the right-of-way instead of using 2-to-1 plus retaining walls. Other than that, it's essentially identical. But because of the changes in the hammerhead, the shallower slopes being used near the driveway, not using any retaining walls in the right-of-way, that's increased the grading quantity from roughly 4,300 to 6,500 cubic yards.
I know you mentioned this before, but if we don't approve it, and if it's just left to a single house being built, I know there would be significantly less grading, right, to be done. But what's the exact difference, and would the would that road still need to be widened for
They-
that one?
they
for
would
one
still
house
have-
to be built.
They would still generally have to provide a road dedication, but we would not compel them to do the turnaround onto the neighboring property, and they wouldn't have to put in a 20-foot wide driveway. Right now, it's a 20-foot wide driveway because they're serving two properties, and each has to have their own 10-foot driveway. So they would only need a 10-foot driveway. They also wouldn't have to go grade as far to the east, probably, because we could compel them to keep the house further to the west to minimize the grading, to minimize the amount of disturbance to the secondary ridge line. How could we do that? Through the design review process. We would require that they incorporate those features of the design.
Plus, the planning commission or the council, I guess it would be the planning commission, would actually have to approve it as well because it's still in the secondary ridge line. You would have to grant an exception to that, even for one house.
Yeah, so the process would be that the applicant, if the planning commission rejected this, the applicant could come back with a single house design, but it would have to come to planning commission first for approval of development in the secondary ridge line. And then if that got approved, then it would go to design review. So it's still a convoluted process. And there's not necessarily a guarantee that any particular house design that he couldn't guarantee. We wouldn't guarantee him that the westernmost house would get approved. Some house might get approved, but that would still have to go through both those processes. And he still has to show that it's reasonable to grant those exceptions or grant a development in the secondary ridgeline and meet the criteria. He still hasn't shown a project that can meet the secondary ridgeline criteria.
Mr. Chair, I might just want to add the human factor. That there was some questions about how come in the past staff has recommended extensions and what has changed. When a case generally has gone through several iterations and a lot of convoluted history and has finally gotten approval, oftentimes staff is inclined to allow them to get extensions so that the same history does not repeat itself. But in this case, so staff, usually does not try to resurrect the convoluted history and allow the applicant to move forward for, reasonable extensions. However, when a case such as this one has expired, it becomes a bit difficult for staff to take a U-turn and go back and restart the process.
Mr. Sheets?
I have one question. I'm not sure how this will relate, but does anybody know when the the pads were placed? Was that part of this process when that was allowed, or was that something totally out of this whole realm?
Mr. Krause has speculated that, and either Mr. Dinellian or Mr. Martirosyan might better know this. We were speculating that maybe this was graded that way as part of Caltrans improvements for the freeway, but it's so far away and there's no obvious grading. I climbed the slope and walked up onto the pad today, and there's no obvious grading out towards the freeway that connects it towards the freeway cut. So it's not clear how or when it would have ever been graded. I don't even know for sure how you get the bulldozer up there, except maybe off the far end of the street and then up and around the ridge and then back along. But why or when it was done, it's not clear. Mr. Dinellian might know better.
I thought it was part of this process. That's fine. I'm not sure what difference it makes.
And the commissioner asked earlier what would be the difference in grading quantity if they only had the one house. We don't have that. I don't have that number for you. Mr. Martirosyan might be able to respond.
I think it was done by
I'm sorry, you're not at the mic. You'll have an opportunity to share that, and we'd like to hear it, but since you're not at the mic, it doesn't do you any good to speak out in the audience. Okay. Any other questions for staff? All right. Mr. I'm sorry.
Actually, I have one more.
Please.
I understand there's been some changes or the hillside ordinance since the original approval has been enacted, or a lot of changes have happened. Regarding that, do we know any of the specifics on how this affects this since the original approval? As far as the hillside ordinance goes?
Yeah, I don't know, Jeff, if you're looking. I mean, from the very first approval,
Yeah.
The very first approval
Well, no,
was
from 2000.
Okay, because the hillside ordinance was already in effect. The very first approval was pre-hillside ordinance, so you had no secondary ridge line at that time, and some of the other standards were different.
The standards really haven't changed since 2001 significantly. The secondary ridgeline criteria came into effect in '93. The project first got approved in January '93, but I'd be willing to bet that the secondary ridgeline criteria came into effect after January, since it was January 11th. So those wouldn't have applied at that time, but they did apply in 2000 or in 2001 when it was approved.
Absent any other questions at this moment, I'll allow Mr. Danielian and Mr. Martirosyan their rebuttal period. And would be interested to know if you know anything about the grading, and I'd also, whether you know or not, I'd like to know how long you've actually controlled the property.
Once again, Haik Martirosyan, I'm not sure about the date that when that was graded. I did not do the actual research to find out the exact date, but I always thought that at the time that they were creating the freeway or creating those streets, those grading was occurred, but might be wrong. But nevertheless, I mean, if that's a rigid, that secondary ridge line, there is a 20,000 square feet of level pad there. We cannot ignore that. It's not the hill that we're talking about that we're going to cut into the hill and build the houses there. The pads are already there. Even if we build one house, as I said before, we still need to cut into the hill to have an opening through the driveway to have access to the even one house. The bulk of the grading is involved to cutting that portion of the street for the driveway purposes. Again, that one-to-one cut along the street right away, it was discussed with the city engineer originally, previously. It was designed 2-to-1 with the retaining wall. City engineer felt that it's better to keep it 1-to-1 because it's close to what existing is right now, and we don't have to build a retaining wall, and city does not have to maintain those retaining walls. That was the whole purpose, that we cut it back to 1-to-1 rather than 2-to-1 that originally was designed for. And that's about it. I mean, as I said, again, that hammerhead, creating that hammerhead for the fire department recommendation, it's creating more grading, I understand, but there is not part of the subdivision requirements. We are talking here to subdivide this property, which is 136,000 square feet of land, which is more than what the neighborhood is. Average lot sizes in neighborhood is 12,000. We are providing 30,000 minimum lot sizes for this project. And I still feel that meeting all the requirements of the secondary ridge line by building 15 feet high building for one level. I mean, it's nothing. Even if we put the driveway, put our garage as a second floor, I mean, it's not going to be visible from either side of the street. And I feel that we meet that secondary ridgeline requirements. That's about it, I have to say. If you have any question, I'd be more than happy to answer it. And one more thing, just remember, regarding the grading ordinance, that occurred, I believe it was in 2003, that changed the grading from 1-to-1 to 2-to-1. That's what this new design is calling for. Original design was 1-to-1, 1.5-to-1 with 5 feet retaining wall. And what we have done, we comply with the new grading ordinance. We kept it as 2-to-1 with 5 feet high retaining wall. That happened to move the driveway a little bit. We changed the alignment of the driveway based on what we had before. So So we are in compliance with today's grading ordinance.
Any other rebuttal comments, additional comments?
Question?
I did have that question for you, Mr. Danielian, if you'd like to, address it.
Just very short. I own the property since, I believe, 1987.
And were the pads graded
And
at
the
that
pads were there, and when I was doing some investigation with the Caltrans, I think one of the engineers told me that it was graded by them when they were doing some, they were built in the freeway.
Huh.
Yeah, so they did the grading. And also, I want to just assure you that you do not have any grading and any grading problem or any planning problem, because like I said, that this project was approved, and all we did just resubmit again, and since then there is no changes in per city planning or engineering code. And I do have all the bonds, the checks that we paid to the city of engineering, okay? And we went through everything, and we got their stamp on it. And we got the planning department stamp on it, okay? So we haven't changed anything. We just resubmit this as is. So everything worked fine. The design review board, the house design board, the grading, engineering. So we have no problem, and I have the proofs here. The check mark from engineering and everything. And I do have that letter, like I told you, that I still received that permit is still open. I can go ahead and do the grading. Yes, Mr. Yesai.
No, the approval from planning was for the grading? You said there was...
a permit for grading?
For the grading, from engineering department, that the engineering handles the grading.
And you said there was a signature from planning department, too. Is that...
Yes, it was from the planning also,
Okay.
yes. And I was ready to pull the permit. But Mr. Hamilton and Cross, they came to the building department just in front of me. They took out the plans, originals, and they crossed out the stamps. They said, we made a mistake. We're not going to allow. And I could have taken legal action, but I did not. We had a meeting with Mr. Garcia and the staff member. We agreed that it's nothing been changed. All we got to do is just resubmit. So I said, fine. I'm not going to spend time on the attorneys and other things, legal matters. Let's just resolve this. I've been working with planning staff 20 years, and I've seen a lot of engineers, and I'm happy with them. I said, no, I'm not going to go and just make a big issue, so we will try to accommodate and work. And here it is. We are here now. And it's a 3-acre land, and all we're asking only 2 houses, not 3. It was 3. It was approved, but we said, fine, we'll go to the 2 houses. Again, thank you very much, and I hope you'll get the approval. Okay?
Any other questions?
Mr.
The Speaker, or for Mr. Martirosyan?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to interject something. This history about the last approval and...
you will get a rebuttal if you're talking about the meeting, perhaps? Just go ahead, Mr. Hamilton. Go ahead.
Well, there was a lot of discussion with Mr. Danielian in 2007 about the upcoming expiration of his map, and staff's opinion that we couldn't approve the map, the final map, because it didn't fulfill several of the conditions of approval. Mr. Danielian insisted that we try to process it, and what we were telling him, what our position was, rather than fight and struggle and scream and try to find some loophole that would allow us to continue to process the map, because you're not going to be able to do that because of the various conditions you can't meet. Just let it expire and then resubmit. We did not say that we were going to be approving the resubmitted map. We just simply said it would be easier and certainly more reasonable to process it as a new approval. But we made no guarantees about approving the resubmitted map. Simply that was an option available to him rather than try to come up with some convoluted way to make the old map remain alive.
And if I wanted to add something too, just
Yeah, I was actually going to wait for you guys to do it during rebuttal, but we'll just continue the free form.
Well, and I don't really view it as a rebuttal. I just wanted to add a legal issue, but it's always been the viewpoint, and it was recently buttressed by an actual published case called Ilanto Properties, that when someone submits a final map for approval, that map has to be in a condition that's so that it could be approvable by the city within a very short time frame. The city engineer, I think, has 20 days to approve it after it's been submitted. So as a result, that case came down in about 2007, about the same time this issue was coming up. So we've always, at this point, been telling applicants when they come in for the final map, it's got to be done. Your conditions have to be satisfied. It has to be literally an issue where the city engineer gets the map, routes it to the departments, planning can go through and say, okay, all these conditions have been satisfied. If it's not in that condition, it can't be approved. And that may have been a sort of a change to prior practice, which was you get someone submit a final map and it will kind of hang out there for months and years. It's a very short time frame in which the city can review a final map, and that's probably what was at stake in this case as well. If it's not, when you get it, if it's not ready to be approved, if it doesn't comply with the conditions, there's nothing the staff legally can do to sort of let it go out a further period of time. So that's kind of where the staff is sort of stuck by the legal parameters of the Subdivision Map Act and the cases interpreting it.
All right.
Did you have also, you said you were going to answer the grading difference between the single house and the two houses?
Honestly, I'm not even thinking about single house. I'm being very honest. I'm not. I waited 20 years, and I may work another 20 years to build on it. Very serious. This is more than 3 acres land. I don't want to build 10,000 square feet house there, which is going to be outrageous. The neighborhood is only 2,000, 3,000 square foot. I may go and build 3 houses, smaller sizes. That's another option.
Any other questions for the speaker at this time, or for Mr. Martirosian by extension? All right. Thank you very much, sir.
For your time.
All right. We've heard your comments. Any closing comments from staff or rebuttal? Questions for staff?
One item came up relative to the excavation permit. Have we cleared up the issue about how long a permit is valid and whether that still holds?
No,
that seems excessive to me.
I can't clarify that for you. We'd have to have somebody from the engineer's office to respond to that.
The reason I bring it up, it's something that we're hanging a lot of thought upon as far as going forward, whether if it has expired, then it's invalid relative to what we are or are not doing. That's the only reason I bring it up. So we need to keep that in mind as we move forward. That's all I have now.
All right. I think the only question I have for staff actually involves a little bit of Mr. Garcia as we proceed into deliberations. One of the things that I've heard during the testimony is obviously one of the reasons that the applicant is here is because of secondary ridgeline. And we've heard that he's here because of 2 houses in secondary ridgeline. We've heard that even if we reject this and he wants only 1 house, whether he says he wants it or not today, he still has that right to pursue 1 house, is that he'd still be back in front of us because of secondary ridgeline. And I guess what I worry about in the course of this is in previous years, and again, times change, there are new hearings, de novo this, different factors enter into it. I worry about getting denying on this basis, denying on secondary ridge, and being in a position where it might be construed as a taking.
Okay.
And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, what we should be observing, what we need to guard against, what the hot buttons are as it relates to that kind of thought process.
Okay. What I would say first, in the first instance, is that a taking doesn't occur unless you're going to deny all economically viable use of the property, or the regulation or decision that's being adopted by the city is so onerous that it's denying any reasonable investment-backed expectations. So denying what is being requested here, which is a request to subdivide one parcel into two parcels, in my view, doesn't deny economically viable use of the property because you can still build one house on it. Whether it would deny reasonable investment-backed expectations is really a really fact-intensive inquiry, but there's a couple of things that you probably would be taking into account, anybody would be taking into account, such as the fact that this has been denied before. It has been approved before, but it has also been denied before for other subdivisions, including the three-parcel subdivision. And there really isn't an expectation, given the amount of time that has occurred since the hillside regulations were adopted, that there's any denial of viable use of the property. Because again, somebody can build a house on here, assuming that they get the approval of the secondary ridgeline approval. Because this decision is the subdivision, you really have to focus on that decision, not whether we were in the situation where they came back for just approval, a request for an approval of the approval of a single-family home in the secondary ridgeline. That would be a separate inquiry that we'd have to look at, look into all the factors: when it was purchased, how much it was purchased for, all those sorts of things. The recommendation I always like to give to the commission is, because this also would have to go to the council if it was denied. That would be something that really they'd have to take into a little bit more consideration. It was appealed to them, and that's probably something we would try to give them some input on. Really, I think the commission can really focus on the findings that it needs to make for approving this subdivision, including the findings it needs to make relative to approving development in the secondary ridgeline. So that's I know it's it's not direct on point because it's hard to do so in this situation, but those are the sort of the parameters.
Well, when I threw in a what if,
Right.
All right.
Hopefully that answers.
All right. I just wanted to get a little thought from you as we entered into the deliberations. All right. Any other questions for staff? Anything that we might want to revisit with the applicant? All right. Given that, I'm going to close the public hearing. It's a pretty short list of people who get to go first in deliberations.
I'll go first.
Next
Give them a break,
meeting.
but there are
Next
paybacks.
meeting, you're right in the
I'll
mix.
go.
There are
I'm
paybacks.
fine.
It's very brave of you to say so. I will.
Okay. We've heard a lot, and it's been over a long period of time, and I'm sure there's a lot that I don't understand about this process. But based on what I've heard tonight and the discussion we've had and the interaction, right now, to me, this project is contrary to the comprehensive plan relative to the secondary ridge lines and trying to preserve them. And because of that, there's a secondary item, which is the excessive grading, which I think is being caused by this current plan. So based on that, my plan is to support the denial.
All right.
Well, if I'm looking at it from the owner's perspective, I understand why. I mean, especially if I've had the property since '88, I can see why. And then I've had it approved for 2 parcels, on and off. I mean, I just had mixed signals from the city. I can see how that's been confusing, and how I mean, if that was my property, I would definitely want to take maximum use of it by building 2 houses, especially because the city has already approved it before. But in terms of, if I'm looking at it from the neighborhood perspective, And what I'm looking at it as far as most especially is how I think one of the mentions was the two parcels approving it now, does it benefit the community? And frankly, I can't even imagine this not being a nightmare, the construction for the two other houses on that same street. And I'm surprised that, given that they were notified of the meeting, that we didn't hear either a complaint or support from any of the neighbors. I'm thinking maybe Thanksgiving had to do something, maybe it had to do a part of that since it was last week and the notice just went out 10 days ago, but I might be wrong too. But I'm wondering if this meeting was at a different time, if we would actually have more, we would hear more from the community. Because I can't imagine, I drove up that road, Raphael Terrace, and it barely fit my own Jeep, which was driving up it, and then by trying to get down, I had to go back and forth, reverse, and go in and out, just to U-turn my car out of there and go back. So I can't see how this will be done without having to close that road for some time. And I know I didn't get a real answer on that. I know there was 2 to 3 weeks, and I can't imagine that not being a nightmare for those two other neighbors. Another thing I'm looking at is safety. I don't know if those neighbors have any kids, but the person who's doing the flags, if he's not there, just maybe 5 minutes, if there's a kid who runs by, and there's a lot of angles there, and I'm concerned about that, or hitting another car. There's a lot of there's very, very little room to move around in that area. So looking at it from all of that, and then also looking at it in terms of the standards of being improved in Glendale since the original approval, I would have to deny this project based on those things.
All right, thank you very much. All right, there's some mitigating things involved with this. We've got, if this had been a cold site, never been graded, we'd probably be even looking at it even more strictly than we have been. We've got some existing pads that have been in place for a number of years. We've got an owner that's owned the property for many, many years and has seen a lot of things changing in terms of the rules from when he first bought it. We've got the consideration about 1 versus 2 homes, what that means in terms of cubic yards of grading, what it means as far as the look or the intensification of what develops on the site. There's a lot of things to kind of weigh back and forth. But on balance, even recognizing those, I still fall back to, and I have to admit it, some of this is a political climate where the will and the philosophy and the approach of the community and the city staff and the city council members have all become, through the years, far more stringent and far more respectful of things that in previous years were just sort of nodded at. And secondary ridge lines are one of those, let's say, precious guidelines that have been put in place, akin to the hillside development. So even with the mitigating factors, and I think I would strongly suggest, and I believe Mr. Garcia has already signaled, that and the direction we appear to be going in terms of denying the tentative parcel map, is that as this approaches council, all those things, those mitigating things that I talked about in terms of how long he's owned the property and that type of stuff, needs to kind of be weighed out and put in front of, let's say, the city council, if it gets appealed to city council, so that they can, again, understand where we as a community are and have been, and frankly, them being elected officials and them more than likely being 5 members instead of just the 3 of us that are here today, have an opportunity to more fully vest everything that goes into it. But in terms of what we have in front of us today, in terms of the information that's been provided by the planning staff, especially as it relates to secondary ridgeline, I agree with both of you gentlemen that we should deny the tentative parcel map. So that said, who would like to do a motion?
I'll move it.
Easy one. There you go.
Just, is this moving
You
it?
can start and then just reference as proposed.
Okay.
by-
So I'm moving to that upon consideration of tentative parcel map number GLN 1625, and after reviewing the records, files, reports, and all documentary evidence submitted with regard to said tentative parcel map, that tentative parcel map number GLN 1625 is hereby denied, and the Planning Commission hereby makes each and all of the following findings of fact. The following A, B, and C. Adopted on this day.
That's good.
Yeah, you can just stop there.
Okay.
And then we'll do our, okay, we have a motion.
I'll second it.
I have a motion support. Please call roll.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Yesayan.
Aye.
And Chair Kane.
Aye. On a 3-0 vote, tentative parcel map GLN 1625 has been denied. We'll move on to Planning Department updates. And we did get
If we have any updates, I think we included in your packet recent approvals from the zoning administrator and the hearing officer.
Always glad to see that. That's where we're at.
I would like to talk about a little bit about the planning department's workload. In the past, we were in the practice.
Let's get our attention.
That's right.
We're all distracted. Does he get his model back? Is that what you were asking about?
Yeah, well, we will look at it.
All right. I'm sorry, Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For many years, we had this practice of actually at the beginning of every year, or sometime in the spring, we would bring in a staff report explaining the planning department's workload. And we stopped doing that a couple of years ago, and we would like to give you a foreshadowing that we intend to bring a report to the Planning Commission sometime in the spring, and then following that, we will take the same report to the City Council, giving an overview of the workload that you will be participating with us in, especially now that the Planning Commission is responsible for all of the appeal cases and a lot of policy work that you should be expecting for the next year. We will give you a foreshadowing of that and the priorities that we have set for the work program. And every week we get new requests from the community members at the city council meetings or elsewhere to do more policy work, and we have limited staff resources, and for that reason we think it's good to put it in writing and have a public discussion about it. And please do expect it, and if you need any particular details in that report, do let us know and we'll make sure to cover that. And that should be in March or April that we'll bring that.
Okay, so that'll give us a chance to see what you envision as far as A, your workload, and B, your priorities.
Correct.
And it'll give us an opportunity to weigh in on those priorities. And then eventually that'll be presented to City Council, who can finalize those priorities.
That's correct. And the priorities that we will present to you are the ones that have been set so far primarily by the City Council. But if there is a change in those priorities, we'll of course take that direction. And you can weigh in making recommendations.
Okay. I will just kind of opine that for the last 6 months or so, we've been very heavily vested in use variances and appeals, and really haven't seen too much in the way of what I would call policy type things in as it relates to planning. We had I think the solar thing come in front of us, but we wanted more input on that. We've got 2 meetings in December. What are we going to be seeing that relates to, let's say, planning as opposed to appeal-type processes?
Soon, in the beginning of next year, you will get a series of recommendations to amend the downtown specific plan. There are some policy directions that were given by the City Council in that regard, and we will be bringing that to you. In addition to that, you might know that Laura Stotler and Alan Loomis and several staff members from the Planning Division have been working on the North Glendale Community Plan. We know Commissioner Sheets has been attending every one of those meetings. So a series of discussions that you should expect will be related to the exciting new policy direction for the general plan, which will start in North Glendale. And that should be, Laura, do you know when we should be expecting to give a report to the Planning Commission?
Laura, Mike?
That's right.
We'll have a preliminary one that will go in February. That's when we plan to start taking recommendations to council.
So we
And
got the
then
North
periodically
Glendale.
after that, we'll have updates.
Do we have an element in front of us?
Well, you will get a whole overview of the way that we're approaching the general plan. The general plan, as we're approaching it, will be much more geographically located and is going to be addressing every location, every area of the city holistically, as opposed to the traditional old-fashioned style of having each element be done separately. Some of the elements will continue to be done separately, but we want to look at everything holistically in a policy approach, and that's our original approach.
And North Glendale would be the first opportunity to do that.
That's absolutely correct.
All right. Very good. Comment?
I have two items, but the first one is to tag on to the issue of the North Glendale plan. I just would like to, I've mentioned it before, the process is very positive, very upbeat, involves the community to a significant amount, and it's really a pleasure to see the public, although there are a lot of staff there, there's still a lot of public that continues to come, is very consistent in their involvement, their enthusiasm, and their thoughtfulness, and not only what needs to be done, but what they can do as far as being part of it. They are literally, for lack of a better term, making policy, and it's starting to sink in. These people are feeling that, and they're showing in a very positive way, in a very mature way, not only that they care, but that they want to do the right thing, and they're not trying to make rules that people can't follow. They're being sensitive to what's good for the city and what's good for the neighborhood. So I'm impressed with the process. I'm pleased to be part of it, and I'm really excited to see how this carries forward. And hopefully, and I assume, the people that are involved in the process will carry this all the way through. They'll not only maybe come to commission, but maybe go to council when it's rolled out and give some input and stay involved as it's implemented in various ways, maybe go on commissions or whatever. But for an area in the city that's been very strong and very healthy and very vibrant for years, I'm pleased to see them, the North Glendale area, be represented and be representative as far as what's going on and what a role they can play and what an important part they are of our city. And I had one other item, a hot button item. I had a question from somebody that relative to illegal add-ons as far as garages. The items that I've been involved in and taken action on have been very frustrating. The process is convoluted, drawn out, and in the end, in most cases, the result is not satisfactory to anybody, I don't think. But a question came to mind from a friend of mine that lives in the North Glendale area, and there was an illegal activity happening across the street, and in fact, one of the neighborhood services inspectors went by and found them adding onto the garage, putting in plumbing, putting in electrical, adding a bathroom, and all of this stuff. And the inspector issued a stop work order, which I thought was great, and it seemed like maybe the plan would work because we caught it early enough. And then they started working again. So I called the Neighborhood Services Department and mentioned that this stop work order was not being followed. And now I'm not sure what's happening, and I reflect that dissatisfaction because this neighbor, not even considering the neighbors in my neighborhood that have had this happen in 3 or 4 occasions, his question was, why, when this occurs, why do we not have a public notice and a public hearing so that the people that are concerned about it and are upset and are frustrated can see that the process is trying to work? Because I'm not feeling that it is in my occurrences, so I thought I would bring that forward and try to answer the question if possible.
Mr. Agani?
I will start responding to the question, and I think Mr. Garcia can add a lot more wisdom to this. The short answer is that when we get those calls and neighborhood services gets involved, we actually we're following due process. We are not staying put and letting things continue. So that's what I can tell you, is that there are a series of steps, and there's a dance that we get into with some of these activities that goes back and forth and involves several different city processes and some legal processes. So the short answer is that we're not just watching it happen and not do anything about it. We do not have the ability to just hold a public hearing on those items for a variety of reasons, and Mr. Garcia can address those aspects and what gets involved some more.
Sure. Just so I'm sure I understood, part of the issue that you raised was in terms of a hearing. You're talking about a hearing regarding someone trying to legalize the changes, or someone hearing on the violations themselves?
No, I know of 4 instances in my neighborhood, and I'm the only one that knows about it, and the people in the neighborhood that have asked questions feel like nothing's being done. So I know something's been done, and I know these people have been contacted. So as they are given their direction and move forward to either permit or remove or whatever they're directed to do by the city, have a public hearing so that now people that have announced it or turned in the violation can have some say, can give some input, because if not, you're only going to get one side of the story.
What I hear, maybe not so much hearing, at least notification of nearby neighbors. A violation occurred, this is the status.
Yeah, and
you're kind of saying?
Well, I say more than that. An opportunity to have their say, to give the other side of the story as far as what is being done and what is not being done, because I've seen instances where significant construction was done out of hours, illegal construction. Once it's done, you will never convince me at this point in time that we will fix that, because I've seen too many instances where we haven't, for various reasons. I know it's a long, drawn-out process, and I'm sorry, Mike, I went beyond your question, but
no, and
that's my point. Let us make the process work by involving the public, and let everybody give their 2 cents.
A couple issues. One is I don't want to get too much into discussion because it's not on the agenda. We just wanted to briefly respond to your question. Just a couple of things I think that would be worthy to point out. One is that on the issue of someone building when there's a stop work order, and that's a violation of the code itself. And we actually, when we have evidence of that, we prosecute that pretty forthrightly, pretty quickly, because it's a pretty easy criminal offense to prove. On the issue of what do you do when something's already been built and all that stuff, I will tell you, and it's really no secret, that in terms of those types of improvements, when we had a discussion with the City Council regarding the 50% rule before, we got some very clear comments from all the council members, I think, about being a little bit more direct in the enforcement of those cases rather than just letting them get drawn out in terms of permitting them legally, where we see clear violations of the code that can't be corrected quickly. Then the enforcement arm of our office gets involved pretty quickly. As far as providing notice to neighbors when we're actually in the code enforcement process, there are some due process issues on that type of response. There's for example, certain inspection records that wouldn't even be disclosed until we've gotten the case resolved. So there are some due process issues there. If you'd like maybe a longer discussion of that, that's something we could discuss, or you and I can discuss that offline perhaps. It becomes a little bit more complicated to have a public notification process of a pending case for due process reasons, and also, frankly, out of litigation concerns that we'd have for a pending case. So I know it's frustrating, but we've heard from not only members of the community, members of our commissions, but our council, quite frankly, and there's been a shift in the focus of these cases, or the way we handle them from a general perspective, to be much more direct in the cases. And
maybe the changes as far as departments, be a time when some clarity and improvement of process can occur. as far as the inspections and follow-through?
Well, yes. I think the City Council has made it very clear that the shift should be from what used to be try to achieve compliance to stop, as the City Council, one council member used the words, allowing people to game the system. That has been really the decisive policy shift. And in terms of the departmental realignments, now we have the opportunity to coordinate the works of the building division and the planning division and neighborhood services such that we can get to the cases much more quickly and analyze sometimes the convoluted histories with the help of the legal staff to figure out what series of possible actions we can take immediately. And those actions are being taken. In terms of asking for noticing a public hearing to discuss those things, we really do not have the possibility of noticing a public hearing for which there is no application. That is something that has to do with our own due process as well, that we simply do not have that option a lot of times. And what we can provide is, to the extent that the files are public and we can provide information to the public, we can allow the public to come and we'll discuss what's going on one-on-one with people.
Okay, I won't belabor it, but my picture of the involving the public would be, once you go through the long process and they are told, the violators are told, you have to permit, let's say they have to permit the structure in some way, you have to open the walls, you have to do things, and at that point when they're told you have to do these items to make said structure legal, to me that's almost like putting in an application to build something, and the public would be notified after that. Is that?
Well, public's not notified of just a building permit.
No,
Public's only notified of. What you're saying is, it'd be nice to insert something where if somebody had broken or apparently broken a rule, that the public could see what had happened as a result of it.
Yeah, that they were. I guess the dissatisfaction I'm hearing is, it looks like nothing was done, although I know that there are many steps, and it goes finally to legal action, and it's followed through. Now, two things could happen from a high level. One, they take the structure down, put it back to normal. Or two, it can be made acceptable. Now, to me, to make it acceptable, you have to do something. And at that point, since it's already built, it was built illegally, it's not like you're putting up a notice that's going to be built. It's already built. And the public could at least have their say. And I don't know, maybe I'm creating a monster here.
You're not creating a monster. You're identifying the monster that we deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah. All right. You've listened. I've made a point. I know that there are some questions at council, and I think, as Mr. Garcia said, there will be some items. Some of this will be discussed at council in the future, or
we don't have anything
actions
specific to this issue, but it's something that it's been made very clear, I think, to everybody, the staff and the community, of a changed approach to enforcement.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you very much. Sorry I took so much time.
And any other comments from commissioners?
How do we find out about these meetings that come up?
You mean the community meetings?
Yeah.
We actually announce them here at the Planning Commission meetings, and we also do a lot of public noticing. But we, as a practice, we always announce them at the Planning Commission meetings.
That was actually one of the big things that they tried to do with the North Glendale process, was all the different kinds of outreach. And what happens is, because we always talk about, you slap it in the news press, that's great if you happen to read the little teeny blurbs and have 20 minutes to read the paper instead of 10.
Yeah.
And that's always one of the challenges, is all sorts of different types of outreach only have a fairly low success rate. But now that you're on the board, you're going to hear about it all.
Yeah. Great.
All right. Anything else?
No.
I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We're adjourned.